I'd like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, September 24th, 2019. The Portland Board of Public Education is meeting in Casco Bay High School in the Great Space. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Atkinson,
Here.
Mr. Balfont, Ms. Bondo,
Présente.
Ms. Figdor, Ms. Davis.
Here. I was here as well.
I saw you.
You're too fast.
Sorry. Ms. Morione, sorry. Okay, take a deep breath. Ms. Thompson.
Here.
Ms. Trevorrow.
Here.
Mr. Inavanza.
Here.
Mr. Norris.
Here.
Ms. Power-Rakowski. Mr. Samuntu.
Present.
Mr. Abdirahman. And Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. For the chair remarks tonight, I don't have very much to say. I did want to remind board members that if you're interested in attending the MSMA Fall Conference, to please let myself, the superintendent, know so that we can have your information ready when it's time to register. And also, if anyone is interested in being the delegate for our board at the assembly, to please let us know so that we can prepare our agenda for next meeting accordingly. That's all that I have. I did want to point out, and I've talked to the superintendent about this over the last few weeks, that there has been a great deal of work going on across the district, but the last few meetings for the school board have had a somewhat light agenda, and I wanted to reinforce that the school board is very much engaged in the work of the district, and that the superintendent does his job at keeping us informed. Tonight's agenda is a little bit more full, so to speak, so it's more representative of all the different work and all the different things that the school board is paying attention to. So I just wanted to put that out there. Having said that, we're up for a report of the students. Tonight we're having a Casco Bay High School report, and so we have Mr. Joseph Inavanza. If you're ready, you have the floor.
I recently got the chance to like create and co-run Casco Bay's first official BSU, and in doing that, I had a chance to like write up a mission statement. And when writing up the mission statement, I came about a quote by Malcolm X. The quote states as follows: "You can't separate peace from freedom because one can't be at peace unless he has his freedom." And this struck me because this like is at the core of what we do here at Portland Public Schools, is to give students that freedom that they can be at peace in whatever they do. And that freedom may come in many ways. That may be going to college, that may be like going to the military, that may be like doing something that they love, but the main focus is that our students are empowered before they're doing that. And I felt like this is like a really good quote that I could share tonight. And so on to like Casco business. So right now the seniors just came back from Senior Quest. So Senior Quest is like a 4-day, 3 nights at Cow Island, where seniors go with their crews and they get to either go hiking or kayaking, and it's all about crew bonding. And freshmen go to the Freshman Quest and currently left for Freshman Quest today. And the freshmen do quite the same thing. And when you're a freshman, you go to Freshman Quest, and when you're a senior, you go to Senior Quest. And it basically is like from the first time you guys meet each other, and then after 4 years being with each other, like that growth that you guys have. The freshmen have begun a new expedition on Wabanaki culture and history. It's called We Are on Indigenous Land, and that is like due to like the fact that, you know, we're here on Wabanaki land, and trying to have the freshmen connect to like the roots of this land and show how important it is for them to realize that, like, you know, this place is not only the place that we occupy, but it's for other. It's owned by indigenous people. And the sophomores are kicking off a new expedition called on migration and immigration worldwide. It's called Beyond the Borders, and it tackles immigration and migration that happens all around the world. And that topic is also very, very important to us here in Portland, because we recently had a lot of immigration to Portland, and it is very much important that the sophomores and Portland as a whole to realize the importance of immigration and why people migrate from their countries. We're at Casco Bay. Casco Bay's first graduating class celebrated their 10th reunion, and alumni came from all over the world. And it was a great event seeing how Casco Bay has grown in the past 15 years of existence. Juniors have an expedition that they do, or the event that they do, where they the dramatization of people's lives. And there's a link on the Casco Bay homepage where people can nominate normal citizens of Portland who are inspiring and doing great work to uplift the city, so that they may be interviewed, and they might that the juniors, I and my class, could do a dramatization of their life and represent, and try to retell their stories. College, we're recently having a college boot camp next Tuesday, October 1st, and senior parent college night for the seniors. And it's kind of like a reminder that the seniors are going and all that. Finally, we had an incident late last week that kind of brought the whole community at our school down. But we had a dialogue yesterday, which I had the privilege to facilitate. And I just want to share that because what happened at the dialogue was very powerful, because I witnessed the power of having a conversation with people. And we just had a conversation as a school at large with faculty, students, and everybody was able to voice their opinions, and everybody was able to be heard. And everybody saw two sides of the story, not just one. And just for us as a board, and just for us as a community at large, is that for us to be able to listen to each other and have conversations about things that go on in our society that we can do to help prevent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Inabansa. Always impressed by how much is going on in our high schools, and how engaged you students, the student reps, are. I can't imagine how busy your schedules are. I appreciate your report tonight. Next, we're up for the report of the superintendent. Mr. Botana,
Thank you. And I always find it hard to follow our students because their remarks are so much more inspiring. But I think today I would like to echo something that Mr. Inabansa said. And as I normally do, I would like to begin my comments by recognizing the Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki, or people of the Dawnland. They're the original inhabitants of the land in which our cities and schools stand, and we're honored to have their children learning side by side with all of our students in our schools today. I would like to begin our recognition section by honoring all of our Summer in the City summer school staff. And I know we have quite a few of you here today, so do you mind coming up to the front of the room so that you can be on camera? So all of our staff that worked over the summer, the ones that took the picture with us, come on, you guys.
We see you.
We see you, come on up. So we know that for some students, summer can be a time of decreased learning. We know that for some students, summer school is the difference between a summer of decreased learning and one where you are able to keep up with your learning. Portland Public Schools works with partners from across the city to ensure that we have great summer learning options for our students. So whether it was our Step Up to Kindergarten, our middle school math camp, our English Language Learners Academy, or any of the many partner summer programs, I would like to recognize the many Portland Public School staff that made this possible. At a previous meeting, we recognized our enrollment and intake team for the work that they did to support students who arrived as asylum seekers early in June. But we also wanted to recognize many of the folks that worked this summer in summer school for rallying to expand summer learning experiences and opportunities to support our school-aged children at the Expo and all of the other children in the Portland Public Schools. I'm going to read off a long list of names, and this is what's been given to me, so if I leave anybody off, it's my fault. Molly Myers, our district summer programs coordinator, Carol Ridlin, our Summer in the City coordinator, Marcy Ann Bushner, Summer in the City staff, along with Carolyn Clavel, Anna DeCastro, Gwen Gilman, Jack Coney, Katrin Monahan, Monique Mutumwinka, Fernando Olimpio, Bakita Sabino, Dorothy Thompson, and Sarah Norsworthy. Sorry, Sarah. Also with us are Lori Babinski, who is the Reiki Summer Program Coordinator, along with Renee Sirio, Fatuma Ali, Jennifer Seed, and Christine Worth. We also have Carlos Gomez, who was our middle school and high school Language Academy Coordinator, Bridget Belanda, Margaret Callahan, Pamela Otunu, Joel Peck, Jessica Sturgs. I didn't mess it up, Joel?
He recognized.
That's Joel Peck over there. Rachel Watson and Mary Ellen Watson. And then we have Maureen Clancy, our Language Access Coordinator, Barbara Stoddard, our Executive Director of Human Resources and Teach Portland Interns, Eric Wood, our Director of Transportation, Robin Wells, our Transportation Logistics Coordinator, Sydney Williams, our ELO Coordinator, and last but not least, our foster grandparents, Fran Seeley and Margaret Genist. So congratulations and thank you to all of you for a tremendous amount of summer work. Now, we said we would limit everyone to a 5-minute speech, so who's first? Again, thank you, guys. You're amazing, and we couldn't do this without you. Okay. Next, I would like to honor Melissa McStay and Bob Carroll. Melissa and Bob day-to-day are school social workers at Deering High School. They also serve as department chairs for social work at the district level, and September is Suicide Prevention Month. We're fortunate to have Melissa and Bob in Portland Public Schools. Melissa has been with us since 2002, and Bob since 2006, and they are a great example of how a team can be so much more than the sum of its parts. Their partnership is a value added for Deering, our social work team, and even the state of Maine. Melissa and Bob organized an awareness training for the staff of Deering High School and personally delivered suicide prevention lessons to all of the high school seniors there. They then took their expertise to assist Maine Youth Suicide Prevention Program in creating lessons that are now available to all schools in Maine. And for their work, they received the Caring About Lives in Maine Suicide Prevention Award. So, Bob and Melissa, you guys are amazing, and we are so grateful that you're a part of the Portland Public Schools and want to recognize you today for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I know. Let's get the math turned on.
Last week, many of our students participated in the climate action strike. Our position as a district is to always encourage student voice. Students who wish to participate and whose parents agrees were given an excused absence, and teachers who had lessons tied to the climate action strike were encouraged to take their classes on an approved field trip. It was great to see thousands of students across the country, including Portland Public Schools students, raising their voices to combat inaction on climate change. Just before the start of the school year, we learned of the passing of longtime Portland Public Schools teacher Betsy Parsons. Betsy was the first openly lesbian teacher in the district at a time where that was not widely accepted. With her courage, she inspired many students and colleagues. She became a leader in the LGBTQ community in Portland and throughout the state. She was instrumental in starting many GSA clubs across Maine. Betsy could not have been prouder of the district's stance in developing the gender-expansive policy and becoming a fixture at Portland Pride events every year. She will be missed. This past week, we lost another Portland Public Schools icon, retired longtime Deering High School Athletic Secretary Gloria Miller. Gloria's husband, Chip, and son, Tom, still work for Portland Public Schools. Tim and Chip, you are in our thoughts and prayers. Yesterday, we published a Community Advisory Committee application. The application is available at our website and has also been forwarded to multiple community organizations, our school messenger recipients, and our staff and community newsletter recipients. The Advisory Committee application is to allow community members who want to serve the school district as volunteer members on various advisory groups an opportunity to do so. We are currently looking to fill an open seat on the Buildings for Our Future District Advisory Building Committee. We will be filling multiple seats on the soon-to-be-created building-level advisory committees for Longfellow, Presumpscot, and Reiki BFOF projects, which will launch this fall. So I encourage everyone in the community that is interested in serving on any of those committees to complete their application before, I believe, October 10th is the closing date for that. For those watching at home, we're meeting this week at Casco Bay High School's Great Space. This is the first of several meetings off-cycle as a result of the scheduled changes for the board to accommodate holidays and elections. Our next meeting is on a regularly scheduled meeting date, so it will be at City Hall, but otherwise our meetings through December will be here at Casco Bay. And finally, I would like to extend my wishes for a good year to our Jewish families as they prepare to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent. Next, for the report of the Secretary, consideration and action to approve the minutes of the meeting of September 3rd, 2019. Is there a motion? Ms. Bondo, second by Ms. Trevorrow. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion? None, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the meeting of September 3rd, 2019, please indicate. And I think we have 2 votes abstaining who were not present. So did you get that? Next, the report of the committees. We'll start with curriculum and ed planning, but Mr. Boffins is not here. Is anybody prepared to? Okay, Ms. Morioni, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. This is going to be a little long because this was an important curriculum meeting that we had. So the Curriculum Committee met on Tuesday, September 17th. The meeting was dedicated to debrief, as a debrief of our high school discipline data and to an update on the multiple strategies being pursued that are in service of ensuring that we have safe, well-managed schools. The data we reviewed reflected the number of out-of-district suspensions that occurred last year, and this data was disaggregated by race, socioeconomic background, ELL, and special education background. Overall, we observed disparities in the data across all 3 high schools, especially when it comes to comparing students who are economically disadvantaged and those who are not. In all 3 high schools, the number of students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds is disproportionate to the overall student population in terms of who was suspended. We observed similar disparities when we reviewed comparisons by race, ELL background, and special education background. Deering High was the only school that had proportional data when disaggregated by race. Notably, we learned that discipline disparities exist nationally, and the national solutions are in part centered on addressing implicit bias. This is work that we all know is already underway in Portland. In our meeting, we also reviewed the strategies being used across the district that include the Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports, the PBIS, which is a tiered decision-making framework that has extensive research behind it, with about 25% of American schools utilizing it. As a district, This is something we're continuing to expand, though a few schools have had the PBIS in place for years. To address the disparities, we're focusing some of our equity-related professional development time to looking more closely at discipline. We are scaling up the equity audits across schools to focus on discipline data and our discipline policy. We reviewed other tools the district is using to ensure safe environments, like the Virginia Threat Assessment Model. We reviewed our other tools in the district and ensuring that safe environments like the Virginia Threat Assessment Model is being used. Finally, we talked about the importance of good data and that staff are talking about efforts underway to collect even more consistent, usable data and to monitor what's happening, and problem solving will be ongoing. We agreed that the staff would bring this data to us as a board annually so that we can review the progress as a result of the strategies being pursued. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Morioni. I did have just one follow-up question. I understand that the packet information from the committee meeting has been made available, because there's a good summary there of the work that you just described that I thought board members could really, and the public could benefit from.
There's exactly all of the packet material from that meeting, and I'm going to repeat the date if the public is interested in looking for it. It's our curriculum committee documents from our Tuesday, September 17th meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Morioni. Next, Operations Committee. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Sorry. Ms. Mariani, could you explain to me what a PBI is?
Explain to what it is?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Actually, I was just going to say our Assistant Superintendent, Ms. Nally, is very well versed in it, and I'd like to turn it over to her. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, so it's a like Ms. Marioni had said, it's a national strategy. We think of it as a decision-making framework that's based on a tiered system of interventions and supports for students. So Tier 1 means the school has those supports in place for all students. So, for example, it would be clear expectations for how you're supposed to act in school. So what are the expectations for the hallway? What are the expectations for the cafeteria? Things like that. Tier 2 is for students who sort of exhibit what we call unexpected behavior, and they need additional supports. So there's sort of more intensive supports for those students. And then Tier 3 is even more intensive and individualized. So it's basically, people sometimes think of it as a program, and there's elements to it that have gotten talked about as what PBIS is. But really, it's all about how you make decisions and have tiered, increasingly supportive level of support for all students. And it's positive in that it's intended to reinforce positive behavior, but a core kind of foundation to it is that there's clear expectations with consistent consequences that everybody understands.
Thank you, Malia, for explaining that. If there's no other questions, Operations Committee, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Operations Committee met on Thursday, September 5th, and we had conversations about the preparation for the 2021 Capital Improvement Plan and the target that the city had shared with us of the suggestion of the amount of dollars to bring forward. We also had updates on Solarize and the Buildings for Our Future next steps. And there was also included in the packet that we had a memo from our attorney at Drummond and Woodsum answering a question from our superintendent around the legalities for school districts to transport middle school students by giving them a bus pass to Metro. That's come up over time through budgetary conversations, and so we have an answer on that as well. And if anyone wants to see that, we'll have the packet on the website. And our next meeting, I think, is the first Thursday of October, which I don't quite know what that date is, but
I will tell you in 1 second. It is the 3rd.
the 3rd. Great, thank you. At 6 o'clock, and it'll be at the Portland District Office. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Finance and Personnel Committee, Ms. Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. The Finance Committee met on September 12th, and we had joining us Representative Mike Brennan who was the sort of third member of the delegation who serves on either the Education or Appropriations Committee. We had met with the other two the previous meeting. So this continued our conversation around state funding, and Representative Brennan was able to give us a wealth of information about bills that were carried over that could potentially have an impact on our budget next year, and kind of talking about what the likelihood was in terms of areas of focus that the legislature may be interested in next year. So that was, it was really good information. We intend to meet with this group regularly as we get into the budget next year, so that we can keep our delegation aware of what's going on with our budget as they're making decisions in Augusta. Also, we're planning on hosting a workshop for the full delegation to get a preview of our budget sometime in the fall. That hasn't been scheduled yet, but we're working on that. Our next meeting will probably be taking some of the ideas that came up in the last couple of meetings and looking at more closely how they might impact our budget. We'll have some ideas then of what possibly we might be focusing on in terms of advocacy at the state level. And our next meeting is scheduled for October 10th. It'll be at 6 o'clock at Portland District offices. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trevor. And thank you for, I know that you and other board members have been advocating for us to engage with the delegation at different parts of our work, specifically at the finance. And we've heard their response saying how important it is, how helpful it is for them to see the details that we're sharing with them. So really, really important part of our work. Appreciate it. Next, Policy and Legislative Committee, Ms. Davis.
We were very glad to see that we were continuing the legislative communications that we've had through the Legislative and Policy Committee around particular bills, but to now extend it to sort of a proactive, where's our budget and how's it going? So I think there was a fair amount of overlap. There's overlap on the people on the two committees, but it's good to see us actually talk in that way, because it was an extension of some conversations that we did have in the Legislative Committee at the beginning of the legislative session last year. On the policy side, we did not meet in September. We just have sort of ran out of available dates between all the meetings. And so our next meeting, we're going to be, because we do have overlap on the Finance and Policy Legislative Committee, we'll be meeting on October 10th at 7:30 and on November 14th at 7:30 as well. So it's a back-to-back meeting for many of us, but efficient use of our time and some overlap in what we're looking at different points too. So.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Next, Public Affairs Committee, Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Talk about back-to-back meetings. We've got a meeting on October 10th as well as the Public Affairs Committee, so I'm going to be back-to-back-to-back because I'm on all three of those. But pack them all into one night. That's actually popular at home. So we met also on September 10th as a Public Affairs Committee. We spent a significant amount of time on our goal, on our board goal for the public affairs around communicating the Portland Promise, and some of our other subsequent conversations in the meeting were also on that same topic. I think that's a key area of effort for our committee this year. We talked about the evolution of coffee with constituents, and Member Balfonts actually brought forward a suggestion that we consider having similar open-ended conversations with students as what we've been doing with constituents. So what we are proposing is to take a little break from coffee with constituents this fall and focus on meeting with students. I think there was a little talk about maybe not calling it coffee with students, just because we don't necessarily want them to develop those habits too early. I think I developed my caffeine habit in high school, so I don't know if I want to pass that one on. So maybe something like a break with the board would be more appropriate. But I sent around an email this morning to the board asking about availability and times that I think this is going to be a real scheduling challenge to find something that works for board members and also works for the high school. So we'll give some time for that to develop, and if board members have feedback, I know I've heard from a couple of you already today. So watch your inbox for more on that. And then the last topic was around this idea of community ambassadors, and one of the challenges that we face as board is community perception of our schools, the Superintendent Botana, actually, I remember him mentioning in the conversation that, the folks who rate our schools most highly tend to be the folks who are actually engaged with our schools, parents, educators, because they're in the buildings, they're seeing the valuable work that's going on there. And I think the goal of this community ambassador program is to spread that love of our schools and that value that we who are more inside the district have with the broader community, because as you all know, community support is such a key piece of our work. So that was our September 10th meeting, and we'll be meeting again on the packed meeting night of October 10th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. Next, Appointments Committee, Ms. Morioni.
I didn't have a lot prepared simply because our superintendent did just speak about the open enrollment, if you will, the open application season is upon us, which means that to the public, it's time now. If you are interested in being a part of any of our building committee meetings for our elementary schools, the remaining schools will be Longfellow, Presumpscott, and Reiki. So if you do have an interest in that, I encourage the public to please look online for our application form for that. And the closing period for that application is October 10th. Also, if you're interested in not only building committees, if you're interested in anything other committee in the future, you can also apply, and we'll have maintain a list of community members that have an interest in being a part of a committee in the future. So I encourage the community to help us and stay involved. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morioni. Are there any other committee or member concerns? Ms. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The District Advisory Building Committee that oversees the renovation of the 4 schools met on September 19th. And some of the items that were on our agenda, excuse me, were discussion around construction management waiver update. And for those that don't know what that is, there's a full description in the PowerPoint that was passed out that evening. We talked a little bit about the difference between construction management and design bid build, which is usually the type of process that is done, and we're talking to the state about a possible construction manager structure. We also had a presentation about sustainability and LEED certification from Thornton and Tomasetti. Mr. Michael Pulaski, he talked to us a little bit about what makes up a green school and about the city ordinance he talked to us a little bit about. We also briefly discussed project budgets and scopes. It's a little bit early on that, but we are working towards what each will include. And then, as Ms. Morioni and the superintendent talked about, we are going to be forming the building level advisory committees for each of those schools. We currently have LISETH in place because that is underway, but we will be forming the others, and then more details to come on those. And we also, on the District Advisory Building Committee, we have had a resignation about 6 or 8 months ago from one of our members that was an at-large member, meaning anyone from across the city of Portland could apply for that position. And it's a really important position for overseeing all of the 4 schools that we've worked so long and so hard to get going. So I encourage you, as Ms. Morioni said, to also apply for that potential position. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Any other committee or member concerns? No. I'll add the Family Partnership Advisory Committee met this past Monday morning. I unfortunately was not able to attend it. It's been my first missed one, but Dr. Valenzuela gave me a quick update. The committee is forming separate subcommittees to dive a little bit deeper into some of the topics that we've been discussing. So now that we've regrouped the membership of that committee and we have it at full strength, so to speak, the 3 subcommittees that are going to be organized, they're going to be discussing topics including attendance, discipline, and the communications and public relations. And again, this is a committee that involves parents from our schools, so it's literally first, the first people that we want to communicate to with these issues, and then have them then go back to their communities and help us organize our messages. Other than that, I don't have any other announcements. So we'll move to the consent items. Will the superintendent please read the list?
I believe that this is a Portland Public Schools first, at least for the past 3 years. We do not have any contributors to recognize, but last spring, we began a practice of reporting to the board quarterly on the fundraising work that's being done by the Foundation for Portland Public Schools. As you know, the foundation has been in existence for 4 years, and we continue to sharpen our focus and partnership as we work with the outstanding foundation board and its fearless leader, Kate Snyder, to increase community support for our schools through targeted giving aligned to our priorities. And so here is Kate to talk a little bit about this past quarter, and then we have a special recognition as part of that as well.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. I'm Kate Snyder, and this is Sarah Morin, who is a board member, vice president of the foundation board. Thanks for being with us, Sarah. So, as the superintendent mentioned, we did start this practice of doing a quarterly report last spring. It was an imperfect quarter because we wanted to get to you before the end of the school year. And so you saw actually kind of a 5.5-month snapshot at that point in time. And you're seeing another imperfect quarterly report tonight because we're doing it now instead of waiting until the quarter officially ends at the end of September, meaning we would see you sometime in October. But we thought it would be good to regroup in September. And then we'll catch up with a regular quarterly report, which will happen in October, January, April, and then whatever's best for you all, July or August, once we've closed the books on the fiscal year, which is June 30th. So, as the superintendent mentioned, we are working to get closer and closer aligned with the Portland Promise and the district's strategic priorities for investment. We're grateful for the opportunity to talk with you all about the donors who come in through the foundation's work and who are supporting the district in its efforts. And so publicly acknowledging and thanking donors is such an important practice. And so thanks for doing it with us. So I wanted to, before I jump into special recognition, I just wanted to point to you that this little handout that you've got does have on the second page the snapshot from the last time we saw you until yesterday in terms of gifts that have come in through the foundation. So you can see the date, the amount of funds, and the donor. So these are all major donors, and we talked about this a little bit in June, that we're not going to bring you every contribution. We're bringing you contributions that are at or above $1,000. So they're meaningful, they're targeted. As you can see, the investment areas range anything from Maine Audubon grants for teachers to STEM investments and funds that the district, that the foundation administers to the benefit of the district and students. And so I also wanted to mention that you also have in front of you the district's, the foundation's FY19 annual report. And I've got many more that I can leave on the table with the agendas for anybody who might want to have a look. But as you all know, we think of this as a very important thanking tool and also a communications tool to our donors and to folks in the community about the work that we're doing. And so hopefully you can have a chance to look through that. But this evening, we wanted to say a special thank you to a new donor to the foundation. WEX, as you know, moved on to the peninsula just last winter, and the superintendent and I have had the opportunity to meet with both Melissa Dudley and Hillary Rapkin, who have been generous supporters of the district's work. So we took in our first gift of $9,000 from WEX to help support middle school math coaching. Again, this is a great example of just community generosity and a very targeted investment in both a content area that is important to a local business and employer and the district. And so we put together a proposal with a variety of options for them. They chose one, and the one that they chose was this investment in middle school math coaching. And I know that Assistant Superintendent Nally is going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, Malia, do you want to talk a little bit about the work that's happening that is part of our new and evolving partnership with WEX?
Yes, I'd love to. So we are grateful to WEX for the generous donation that, as Kate mentioned, has served as a key catalyst to the district-wide strategy around improving our math learning outcomes for all students, and in the case of the WEX investment, in particular for our middle school math efforts. The money we received from WEX has been used to build internal capacity with our middle school math coach team, and it will be used to support our administrators with deepening their knowledge and vision around the key shifts we are making in the way that we teach math. We are now entering our third year of a focused effort to realign our approach to math instruction to better reflect the current research about how students best learn math. The shifts we're making focus on taking a more experiential approach, where students are offered an engaging task that they're asked to explore before the teacher synthesizes the learning points. These engaging and rigorous tasks have what we refer to as low-floor, high-ceiling entry points, so that all of our learners in a class can interact with the fundamental grade-level principles being taught. This approach to teaching math draws out the knowledge and creativity students naturally bring, rather than trying to simply get students to memorize the algorithm being told to them. In addition to the coaching at middle school, we're entering our third year of a focused coaching effort at the elementary level, which is being led by a nationally known math expert and author, Tracy Zagar, who happens to live here in Portland. Thanks to Tracy's connections, we're one of a few districts piloting a new curriculum in our elementary schools called Illustrative Math. This is the same curriculum we rolled out in the middle schools last year. One of the most exciting outcomes from this new curriculum is that we've heard from multiple teachers that when they first reviewed it, they thought it would be too challenging for their students, but that they've been amazed at how their students have been able to access the content and rise to the high expectations. On a personal note, my 7-year-old son is in one of the elementary classes that's piloting it, and he came home a week ago, and the first thing he said was that math was fun. He proceeded to regale the family with a blow-by-blow description of the lesson. In addition to the coaching and curriculum efforts underway in pre-K through 8, we're headed into our second year of work with a pre-K through 12 district-wide math team. This group articulated a common vision for math instruction last year and did work to level set on what's happening across the grades in schools. This year, we're setting out to look at the structures in place that help or hinder all students from getting access to learning on grade level. This will include an exploration of tracking students in math. Finally, we're starting some exciting work at the high school level in the professional learning group structures, including reading some common texts and an emerging pilot of illustrative math in 9th grade at Portland High School for students entering 9th grade not yet in Algebra 1. Once again, we're grateful to WEX for playing a key role in supporting this deep and comprehensive work, and we believe will improve our math learning outcomes and that will make math engaging, relevant, and perhaps even fun for our students. Thank you.
So I'd just like to join Kate and Malia in thanking WEX, our new Portland neighbor, for stepping up to the plate big time. Unfortunately, Melissa Dudley and Hillary Rapkin from WEX had a conflict and could not be here today. I saw Hillary this morning at our United Way board where we both serve, and she was very sorry she couldn't be here, but they had a previous commitment. And as Kate mentioned, we're so proud of this existing partnership and very much look forward to continuing to have it grow and evolve to do the kind of work that Malia Leah described. And Kate and Sarah, I can't be any more grateful than I am for your partnership and support of the work that we're trying to do to advance the Portland Promise, and really helping to bring philanthropic and business support to that work is amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Assistant Superintendent Nally, Joseph had a quick question about some of the information you shared with
Okay.
us. If you don't mind. Sorry.
So I heard you mentioned the tracking of students. So I'm wondering, does that mean like you track like their abilities or like what they are able to do in the classrooms and like dictate where they would go, which math class they would take, or something else?
Yeah, so the pre-K through 12 math team had our first meeting, I think it was last week, and this was actually a big conversation we had, which was, what do we mean by tracking students in math, and do we agree on that definition? But in general, our focus is around making sure all students get the opportunity to learn grade level content. And so, for example, in the elementary school, sometimes what happens is we group students by ability, and the intention is to help them with, exactly where they're at. But what often can happen is students end up in the low-level group, let's say, and they never actually even get exposure to the core lesson. So of course they never learn it because they've never gotten to be in the group that's kind of at grade level. And so that just starts them down a path of being behind throughout the rest of their career. So that's kind of the concept we're looking at. That's how it might play out in elementary school. In high school, it might play out that you have multiple entry points for math, and if you start in pre-eligible or below that, you may never get through high school standards just because of the track that you're on. So we're trying to explore that, while at the same time recognizing, especially by high school, there are some students who have a particular passion or talent in math, and we absolutely want to offer them opportunities to extend beyond what other kids might achieve in math in high school.
So like you mentioned that the students like get to like end up going into like lower tracks, or like classes that are like below, or like they end up with like lower groups and stuff. So like, is that because they can't so is that because like in a classroom where like the math contact is like higher and stuff, is it because like they can sustain that kind of information, or is it just because of how people are being distributed according to like how they perform in like their different math classes?
Well, this is a really big topic, and I'd love to talk in more depth for in all honesty. But I think there's a lot of reasons, but just like take one example. We have a lot of students who are English language learners, and so we saw a pattern, again, starting in the early years, of students getting grouped separate from the whole class and getting taught like some of the more basic skills, and sometimes maybe a sense that they weren't understanding the math, but it might have been more about the extent to which the math was accessible. So when we've chosen our math curriculum, one of the main criteria we've looked at is the program good for students who are English language learners? And so when I mentioned our curriculum having low floor, high ceiling access points, and not being so reliant on language that you can't get to the math. That's an example of a place where we're trying to get all students to be able to learn the grade level standard or the concept, but then the tasks are, as our coach says, stretchy. So somebody who's still kind of just getting a sense of the task can have a way of learning the big idea, and somebody who's really, again, passionate and talented in math will have like an extension opportunity, all centered around the same kind of key concept. So I do think that there's sometimes a student might have, certain gaps in their background knowledge and or just sort of various challenges with accessing the math. But what we're trying to really solve for is the situations where students just never been taught the grade level standard because they've been in a lower group, and that group's not even getting a chance to learn the grade level standards. So we're starting there, recognizing that there's still a need for differentiation.
Thank you.
Yeah, great questions.
Thank you, Malia. And Ms. Snyder and Ms. Morin, thank you so much for the report and the information. I believe we all got it in the mail as well. So I said it last spring, how important it is for us to see this and to connect the value of the foundation with the work that the school board believes is important. And like you mentioned, to connect it to a Poland promise. So again, thank you for the report. Ms. Davis, you had something? Mr. Norris, were you also?
On our agenda, it did list some donations that were given to Riverton School, and I just wanted to make sure that those didn't get overlooked, and because
I
they were
think they
on.
may have been overlooked by me. They were not on my agenda, and so I sat there looking for it, and I couldn't
They're
find
not
it.
there.
And so that's where, so we will definitely add them back at the next meeting and
Okay.
and do that.
Just didn't want to have them get
Yeah,
lost.
no, they won't.
Thank you, Ms. I was going to offer that we pass the hat around so we had something to say, but thank you, Ms. Davis. You spared us. Ms. Bondo, you had a question.
Yeah, I just want to talk about what we're doing. What just made the curriculum you just mentioned about what we're gonna do on the area of for the curriculum. Because when I look at what we have as a base, I mean we don't have any. We have a standard for the curriculum, and I think on the maths right now, this is the only area, then we start having a standard. I mean, across all areas. I mean, across all the students, all different categories of students, having a clear curriculum base for all of them. So, can we go a little more deeper in details, maybe on the curriculum committees, to try to define exactly the work then we have to be doing, because this is so critical on the achievement gap. Because when you look at it, and when you just analyze, just mention about how the subgroup or some of the students never be putting that kind of opportunities to be on such a level of mathematics. So I mean, we need to go more deeper with that and see how we can try to find some more partner across the community to try to support those kind of work, can try to really try to boost the gap of the achievement gap, especially on the mathematics.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk in more depth at Curriculum Committee and do an update on educational issues on the core instructional priority. I think that'd be helpful probably to go deeper across the board.
And I do want to remind the board that that is one of my goals and accountabilities to you is, our implementation of our core curriculum initiative. So we will be reporting on that regularly. And that's actually why we wanted to take this opportunity to have Ms. Nally in the context of the contribution from WEX to not just highlight what's happening as a result of WEX, but how it ties into the larger work that we're trying to do around mathematics in the district. And I know that Ms. Nally has done a terrific job, I think, of bringing to the curriculum committee the sort of the compelling need for having the level of support that we've been able to put into mathematics over the last couple of years across the curriculum. And I am, proud of the fact that the board has supported the work, in STEM, in social studies, and in English language arts over the last couple of years to allow us the capacity to do some of that work, because we definitely need to go deeper, as you said, in this work. And, that is not something that you can just snap your fingers and do. You need resources, you need time, and you need a plan. I think we have that, and we need the resources and the time to actually bring it to fruition. As Malia described, it's been a 3-year effort now. We're in the 3rd year of our work around mathematics in the district.
So also, I want us to realize that, mathematics is like a universal language. So even though, the ELL students, are coming from, different backgrounds and aren't able to speak, English or anything like that, but, math is, math is taught everywhere in the world, and that even though, they aren't able to, communicate well as other students, but, there's a possibility that they're able to comprehend, the content that is being taught in the classes. And for us to, be it is it's necessary for us to give them the basic learning so that they can comprehend and they can understand. I kind of feel as if students aren't also themselves, they're being put in a position where they can speak out and say like what they really want or what they really need because of like this, like the notion or just like this this construct or this social construct that like teachers are in power or like teachers are up there, and teachers, when the teachers give you advice, you kind of like have to lean on to the advice, or you kind of like have to take the advice. For example, if I had I was an ELL student and I had a counselor and I went to my counselor and my counselor told me classes that I would like recommend, the classes that for me to take, recommended in quotation marks, you know, like those are like stuff that happens where like those students or those ELL students like feel compelled to do those things while we don't even know that they're able to compete. And like for in the terms of mathematics, the universal language, so it's like we also like need to be mindful of like those disparities that can happen and those things that can put those students that like can perform well but like just aren't able to communicate. And you know, we have a achievement gap that also translates into opportunity gaps after high school.
And I agree with that. And the opportunity gap is what actually, in many cases, is the block that doesn't allow students to have access to that level of mathematics that they're capable of doing. There is definitely a lot of language involved in any content area, just in terms of the way that it's being taught, the word problems and things along those lines that come into play. But absolutely, our English language learners are extremely capable of doing math. And I think Ms. Nally's point was that we oftentimes, because of structural, the way that we organize our schools, whether it's the courses, whether it's the counselors, whether it's the pull-out programs for English language instruction, they oftentimes don't have access to the content that they are absolutely capable of doing. And I think that is part of what this effort is all about.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, everyone, for the engagement in that discussion. And again, important work that's credited to the work of the foundation and how they help to support the funding for these programs. So next, we'll move to the board focus on educational issues. I think Superintendent Botana is going to lead this discussion, and we're going to talk about the high school choice process and policy here in the district. Are you going to project?
Yep, we are. Mr. Nabanza, would you mind, or Mr. Norris? That would be great. So thank you. Today we're going to be presenting on our high school selection process. And normally when we do present an item under the Board Focus on Educational Issues section of the agenda, we're presenting on data around work that is being done in the district or on an in-depth look at an issue that we're looking to advance in a specific way. And today's presentation is a little bit of that, but it's also something a little bit different. I want to talk with you today about a longstanding set of practices in the district, and I'm presenting some options for your consideration. However, I want to be clear that I'm not making a specific recommendation, and rather I'm trying to help you get a sense of where we are, some of the challenges associated with our current practices as they stand, and some potential options for adjusting those practices. I think it's important to point out that the last time a Portland Board of Education considered this issue in full was probably in 2005, which predates everyone on this board. So my goal is to sort of get consistent understandings, level set around the high school selection processes with you as the policymaking body because our policies, as you'll see in a minute, are fairly loose, and the body of practice has evolved around that policy that I believe warrants our collective attention and consideration. So today's presentation is largely informed by the events of the past year, where we had what I would describe as an unprecedented decrease in the number of students selecting to go to one of our comprehensive high schools, specifically Deering. And I've had people say to me, well, why are we concerned with a one-year blip? Aren't we doing everything that we can do to change the circumstances and to influence the narrative that brought about that decrease? And obviously, the answer to that, to the latter part of that is yes, we are. I'm very confident that we're making inroads that will once again show the viability of Deering High School. But given that we did not have what I call policy guardrails in place to prevent this from happening, and given the significant implications of those events, I believe it's worth our time to consider options. And so that's why I'm asking you to engage in this today. And as a result of today, I would like to have a sense from the board as to your interest in continuing this conversation further. And based on that discussion, I would like to have the opportunity to regroup with Chair Rodriguez to determine what might be our next steps. So with that, just a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a background on the high school selection process, policy, history, and current practice, and then talk about some alternative approaches, and as I mentioned just a minute ago, get a sense from you in terms of direction for next steps. My goals are to have us walk away from here with a common understanding on the high school selection process, including the policy basis and the historical development of the practices, provide an overview of the current selection process, discuss the possible alternatives to current practice, and again, gauge your interest so that it sort of directs where we go from here. So the policy basis, the only policy that is currently in our books that deals with choice in some way is policy JBF, which is our educational options policy. That policy was passed in 2005. Thus, my comment about 2005 was the last time that this was, fully developed as a board. It was last reviewed in the curriculum committee in May of 2016. So if you look at the policy, which is part of your agenda, you'll see that there was a curriculum committee review in May of 2016. So clearly, from my perspective, I've not been a part of those conversations since I've been in Portland, and I suspect that, I know that many of the people on the board have not, unless you were on the curriculum committee in 2016, right? And, Ms. Davis, you always remind us that it's always a new board, so I think that, to the extent that it is definitely a new board from the last board that reviewed that, I felt it was important for us to review it. So the policy, and it's a very brief policy, but it basically does a number of things. It acknowledges the value of neighborhood schools, and it also speaks to the value of providing informed choices for parents from a range of options within and among schools. And it also talks about striving to eliminate barriers that prevent equitable access to those options and examine the impact of the policy on school demographics. So those are all worthy pursuits, and they sometimes work in, they don't necessarily work in a linear fashion. They sometimes work against each other, and I think that that's part of what, from my perspective, we need to grapple with and determine if that's something that we want to clarify in some way. A little bit on the history of this, and I want to start by saying publicly that I would gladly pay $10 to anybody who is able to provide documentary evidence of when and why high school choice started in Portland. While they're at it, if they can also identify what happened to Atlantis and tell us where Jimmy Hoffa's body is, that would be awesome and well worth the $10 and maybe a tip. So again, what I've found in doing the research on this is that there is no documentary evidence about it that I've been able to find. I think we've narrowed it to between 1969 and 1979 is when it began. It is interesting to talk to people who were in the district either as students or as graduates or as staff, because everybody has a varying recollection. We have one staff person who graduated in 1979, who says he did not have choice, and then another one who graduated in 1975 that says that they did have choice. So I also talked to two former superintendents for the district, and both of them, one actually said, I have no idea, and the other one, who was also a parent in the district, believes that when she moved to the district and bought her home, she was told very clearly that there were 3 schools that her children would go to, and that as far as late as 1982, when her youngest began high school, that there was no choice at that point. So, and I know I've spoken to Board Member Thompson, who has a very different recollection of that, and so this is why I would love the documentary evidence, so that we actually can put, our fingers on something. The closest that we found to documentary evidence is a newsletter from the the League of Women's Voters in 1979 that described Portland broadly and talked about the educational system. And it said that in 1979, the district began the district moved 9th graders out of the junior high schools and into the high schools. And I think, based on all of that non-documentary evidence that I talked about, people's recollections, it seems like it may have been phased up from that group of students over time. So those 9th graders and then, the subsequent 9th grade class and so on were the ones that phased up. And I suspect that it may have been different in different areas of the city, just from talking to some of the folks that were that have contributed to our understanding of this, where they seem to recall that if their middle school was split, where half of the kids went by neighborhood to one area and the other half went by neighborhood to another area, that they may have had a choice at that point. And so, sort of in general, we don't have a firm grasp on what actually happened. So it would be great to actually be able to put our fingers on that. But what we do know in this century is that in 2005, Casco Bay High School was founded as a school of choice, and I don't think it's just coincidence that that was also the year that the educational options policy was adopted. I believe that those two are probably in concordance with each other. And then in 2015-16 was the first year that Casco Bay reached full capacity at 400 students, and we'll talk about that in a second. So briefly, a little bit about our current practice. Students get to select, regardless what middle school they attend, or if they're coming from a non-public school into the public schools, they get to select from among the 3 high school choices, so Casco Bay, Portland, and Deering High School. Casco Bay's enrollment since 2015-16, when it reached the 400 student number, has been capped at 100 students per grade, and the kids that apply to Casco Bay are selected by lottery whenever the applications exceed space. And they've always exceeded space. Demand ranges from a low of 128 the year before last, so the 18-19 school year, to 198 students that applied to come to Casco Bay last year. Prior to that, the previous high was in the 16-17 school year, when 176 students applied to come, and the average of applicants per year is just short of 160 applicants. Consistent with the policy, the Casco Bay Lottery provides things like a sibling preference, so that's to lower some of the barriers and demands as described in the policy. So if an applicant has a student currently attending, they are given preference to attend Casco Bay, and their lottery also strives to keep Casco Bay representative of PPS's overall enrollment. So there are choices that are made along the way to ensure that the school remains representative of PPS's overall enrollment. So this shows you a little bit on a timeline of what the steps are in the current process. So some students, not all, it's not required, do some shadows in the fall and winter, and some visit all 3 high schools, some visit 1, and that's arranged directly by the families with schools. The schools then hold open houses. That usually happens in the late fall, early winter. And we have one that is a district open house, and that is targeted primarily at our multilingual, multicultural families. So that has all of our materials are translated. Our staff that work with the different communities are on hand to be able to facilitate the discussion around that. And all 4 of our schools, because PATHS also participates in that, are represented at that. And then each of the schools holds its own open house. We then do middle school visitations to high schools. In mid-February, Casco Bay requires commitment forms to be turned in. So that basically says, I want to go to Casco Bay, and my second choice is, and then they fill in what their second choice is. The Casco Bay lottery and preliminary placement decisions happen in usually around the 1st of March. That's usually the timing. And then in rapid succession after that, the students who do not get into Casco Bay are then enrolled into their second choice high school, and that process continues then throughout the spring and into the winter as students say that they don't want to attend Casco Bay and they want to instead go to their second choice as students move and students, basically opt into one of the other schools. So that continues all the way into, the beginning of the school year. A little bit about our historic freshman enrollment and then, the sharp change that we saw this year. So that's what you see here. You can see that overall the trend line has been fairly consistent since the 2013-14 school year, where was the first time that Casco Bay went to 100 students, and that at that point there was a sharp decrease in the number of students who enrolled at Portland High School. And that is also a relatively small class for the school district. So it was about 50 students short of what this year's freshman class is. So I think that also impacted that. So there were 25 additional students that had an option that previously they didn't have. And so that took a number of students away. But, overall, you can see that there we go. I love animation, except when I forget that it disappears and then it reappears. So that is what you see was the previous decrease. So I want to just be clear that I don't think that was a decrease of any event or series of events that happened at Portland High School as much as it was a smaller class overall, and the year that there were 25 additional students who had an option, and many of them wound up going to Casco Bay. We obviously wanted to have a better understanding of what happened last year, and this was actually, I want to recognize Board Member Morioni, who urged us to do this while we still had the class of 2018-19 in the middle schools last year. As we surveyed all of that class, so both their parents and the 8th grade students. About 300 of our students actually completed the survey, and a little bit over over 100 parents completed the survey. And so as part of the survey, we asked them a number of descriptive questions about themselves and what their choices were and for the parents, a little bit of their family history in terms of what school they had attended. Did they have other students who had graduated from Portland public schools and things along those lines. But we really were most interested in understanding the high school selection process and what were some of the things that people looked at and valued highly in making those decisions. And I think what you'll see in the following slides is that there was I think, a remarkable degree of agreement on what it is that people made their decisions based on. And, we did not do focus groups or anything to go deeper into sort of understanding the specifics of what is it about those items that people recognize, or even if it's exactly the same thing across the board, but the results are fairly consistent. And so this is the parent survey. So this is aggregated for parents regardless of which school they chose. And I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but a significant majority of the parents that responded were parents who selected Portland High School. So, representative of the number of students that actually wound up selecting Portland High School, I suspect. And so you can see that academics and the child's preference were the most important and most highly sort of ranked of the different options that parents selected. And I think it's also interesting to look at what were the least significant. And so when we briefed our middle school principals on the data, I did tell them, sorry, but it doesn't seem like the middle school staff is very influential in actually driving those decisions, and you'll see that that's consistent at the student level. And then I think surprising to me, and maybe to some of you, is that family members currently attending or family members being alums was also some of the lowest ranked things. So I think that was interesting. I think, there's also been some speculation that school location, the fact that Portland High School is centrally located, was a factor that made a difference to people. And as you can see here, it was right in the middle of the table, and significantly less important to people than obviously academics or child's preference, and as well as many of the other factors. And then this is the student survey, and this one we did break out by which school the students attended. And I think what was really remarkable about this is the degree of consistency, regardless of what school the students selected, that personal preference. So I think confirming what parents said, that it was what the students wanted that mattered the most, not what the parents wanted, that actually went into that, as well as academics, safety and security, and the specific school schedule. And each of our schools, as you know, has a different and unique schedule, and that was an important factor. Again, school location, surprisingly, I think, was not important. It was in the middle of the table for all except for the Deering High School students, which I thought was particularly interesting, and I didn't exactly know what to make of it. And then I think, consistent with what you saw in the parent survey, the encouragement of middle school staff, the family currently attending, and the alum were the lowest ranked items on both the parent and the student surveys. So the parent survey had one less question, and that's why you see that slight step there. But I don't remember exactly what it was that we took out, but we decided it wasn't appropriate. It wasn't an appropriate question for the parents. So I think the other thing that's important to note, we asked this question of parents, but we did not ask this of the students. We asked parents if they were aware of the enrollment and facility study work that we did last year. So I think everybody recalls that we spent a significant amount of time and received a significant amount of sort of public, visibility as a result of looking at our enrollment and facilities. And so about half of the parents that answered the survey said that they were aware of the enrollment and facility study being done. And 17%, so almost a fifth of the people surveyed, said that they were concerned that as a result of the enrollment and facility study, that they were getting the sense that Deering may not be a four-year high school. Again, you have to remember the timing of the high school selection process sort of dovetailed with the high school choice process. So it was a time when there was a significant amount of discussion about what the recommendations would be and, whether one of the recommendations would be to consolidate there were several options, but in all of those options, whether it was a K-12 expeditionary learning school or whether it was a 6 through 9 middle school or a 7 through 9 middle school, with Portland being 10, 11, and 12 comprehensive high school. In all of those configurations, Deering would not continue to be what it is today and what will continue to be in the foreseeable future. And 9% of the total population said that that influenced their decision and that as a result of it, they selected different schools. So if you put that in context, if the overall survey population is representative of the whole of our families, so if the 100 respondents are representative of the overall population, that could be about 40 students right there that would have changed their mind, and we don't know if that changed their mind, that they would have, selected to go to Deering, or, they would have selected to go to Casco Bay. But I think it's fairly reasonable to assume that influenced the decision not to go to Deering. So why does this matter, and why am I so worked up over this? I think because, one, I think that it impacts on a school's viability over time. If you sort of take what happened this year and project it out over 4 years, you would see a much diminished Deering at the end of those 4 years. So if we were not able to reverse this trend beginning next year, you could see in 22-23, a total of under 600 students at Deering High School. So, I think that would compromise the viability of Deering High School, or any high school, as a comprehensive high school with our current level of resources and with the pressure that we would experience if we actually had the alternative of that, which would be the 300 plus students that are missing there at Portland High School. Portland would be at capacity, and Deering would be bordering on inviable. That would result in lack of upperclassmen leadership. I think that's an important thing to note. This past summer, when the publicity around Deering came out, it was upperclassmen who stood up and said, "This does not represent the school that I attend," and that level of leadership, ownership, commitment to the school would be compromised in a setting where we consistently have 130, 140 students as the graduating class. And I think it would also have implications for programming, for sports, and things along those lines that would be very substantial. The impact this year was severe on a financial level. So after our budget had been established and set, when we found out that we had the significant increase of students wanting to attend Portland High School, we recognized that we needed to be able to ensure that those students would have the experience that they signed up for. And so one of the key value proposition aspects of what Portland High School has to offer is the freshman team, the freshman academy, with, a small community of students that stay together with a group of teachers that work to better understand their needs and provide special support to those students as they make that important transition into the high school. And we know that that is valuable. That is, something when we talked at the last meeting about the Bar Foundation data, you saw that, those transitions are critical, and that the more that we can do to support students through those, the better. And so we did not feel that we could say, well, we're just not going to have a freshman academy and we're just going to make do with the resources that we have. So we had to add a significant number of staff. So 3 staff that we added to Portland High School to the tune of roughly $250,000, and we also moved an English teacher where we felt that we had the capacity to remove 1 FTE from Deering and move that over to Portland High School. So that completed the team of 4 teachers at PHS. And we also moved some additional resources to to backfill some of the areas, English language learners, PE, those were .5 positions that we moved over to Portland High School, as well as a 1.0 world language FT, and that was half FT in Spanish and half in French. And then I do think that it's important to point out that as a result of that increase, we wound up with larger class sections at Portland High School for some sections, as well as some electives that we might have offered before that we weren't able to offer as a result of that. So that is, I think, an important part of the implications of our current practice. So I want to transition into some options that we've been talking about and that I would like to put on the table for consideration. On this page, you have a couple that I believe we have the ability to do without any change in policy, or even, I think that these are administrative decisions that we could make, which doesn't mean that we wouldn't want to discuss them publicly, and that's why we have them here, and we will, obviously, depending on our conversation today, take them out for an additional level of discussion. But they would be things like having a centralized high school fair instead of having a school-specific set of high school open houses. The idea there being to provide a uniform setting where everybody has the same opportunity to hear from everybody, that we would have centralized materials that would be vetted. It would downplay some of the sales aspect of the high school choice process as it exists today. And, I'm sure that different people have different opinions on that, but it would be a way of, trying to have a consistent message and give everybody the opportunity to hear from all of the schools. We currently do that as an add-on for our multilingual, multicultural families, but we would just make that an opportunity for all families to come. It wouldn't have to be one. We could do 3, we could do 5, whatever it would, I don't think that it means that we would just do a single one-shot, this is all you get, but that's one option. The other one is to change the time frame, and this particularly is to address the budget situation that I discussed earlier. So that would prevent us from being post-budget, finding out that we have different staffing needs and having to figure out how we're going to pay for that, which is not something that you want to do when you're in the middle of your budget process. And so this does have implications for moving some of the selection process, at least an introductory level of that to the 7th grade, so that students would already be thinking about what their choices were, and maybe, early in their 8th grade years when they would make those choices, and then we would be able to run lotteries and do all of that stuff to be able to make the decision. So those are a couple of options. The others are more they're more dramatic, I guess. One is to return to geographic districts, and that's consistent with how we operate all of our other schools from kindergarten through 8th grade. We have boundaries, and students attend school within those boundaries, with some exceptions and things along those lines. Obviously, Casco Bay was founded as a school of choice and would remain that, and we would obviously have to build the boundaries so that we assured even distribution of the student population and have it be representative of the district for the remaining for the 2 comprehensive high schools. And then the last one is this notion of a universal application process where everybody would do a centralized application. They would pick their first, their second, and their third choice, and we would have a cap that in a standard 500 student class would be very consistent with those numbers that you saw previously in terms of what our enrollment has looked like over time. So it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 220 to 180 students, and we could roll that up or roll that down and make it proportional to the size of the class. It assumes that Casco Bay stays at 100 students, capped at 100 students, and so that's what that option would be. And to sort of put it in context, and these are not scientific. This is sort of my sort of assessment of where those fall on a continuum of low to high, both in the degree of change that they require and their potential impact for some of the issues that are of concern. Obviously you see that there's a varying level of impact, as well as the amount of change that is required as a result of that. So again, I just want to point out that what I said at the beginning, that there is only one time prior to this year where we would have actually had a situation where somebody did not get their first or second choice of school, and that would have potentially been in, and I don't know what would have actually happened in 2013-14, because as I said, we were adding a number of slots at Casco Bay, so presumably a lot of students, 25 students, got a choice that they did not have before by being able to apply to Casco Bay. So I don't know that we would have actually needed to activate this, given the size of that class. We may have wound up close to where we actually wound up. And then, obviously this past year. So let me just walk you through what I think is a worst-case scenario that's loosely based on this year, but actually a little bit worse than what this year is, just to try to give you a flavor of what that universal application process, because I think that's the most foreign to our experience. And so I thought it was worthwhile to try to just walk you through what happens. So with a standard class of 500 students, you could potentially, and this is close to what we saw this year, you could potentially have 200 students that apply to Casco Bay as their first choice. As I mentioned earlier, in our class this year, which is slightly higher than 500 students, we had 198 students who chose Casco Bay as their first choice. we know that only 100 students can get into Casco Bay. When we looked at the waiting list, so the students that did not get into Casco Bay this year, we found that of the Portland Public Schools students, so the students that actually had been in Portland before, 75% of them had Portland High School as their second choice, and 25% had Deering as their second choice. So if you just applied that to the rest of the population, so the remaining 300 students, and you thought that the waiting list, you know, Casco Bay's selection process was representative of what is in the waiting list. So 3/4 of the students wanted to go to Portland High School as their second choice, and 1/4 wanted to go to Deering. And again, I'm trying to present this, you know, somewhat based on our current reality, but it is what I believe is a worst-case scenario, because I think that our numbers bear out. We had more than 100 students that actually wound up at Deering. But if you sort of played this all the way out, and you had 75% of those 300 students wanted to go to Portland, and 25%, so that's 225 that would want to go to Portland, and 75 that would want to go to Deering. So our high school enrollment, as a result of that, would result in everybody getting their first or second choice, except, so with a cap of 220 and 180, except for a group of about 80 students that would wind up with their third choice in this particular scenario. So a fairly significant number that would actually wind up with their third choice if we went in this direction. Again, I'm presenting this as what I think is a worst-case scenario. It is this year magnified, because obviously we wound up with more students at Deering High School than what those numbers would indicate. But in that particular scenario, you could wind up in a situation where you would have 80 students that would have a first or a second choice that we would not be able to honor. So that's it. Questions?
Go ahead, Ms. Knox.
I'm going to give my little spiel first, and then, so I want to thank you for doing the research that you did, trying to find out, because I know that we do have some archivists in the city of Portland that probably could find that, but anyway, having a brother that entered Deering High School in '79 and graduated in '83. I entered Portland High School in '84 and graduated in '88.
And you had choice. And your brother
All were
had
choice. So I have two children that both went through the Portland Public Schools. Growing up in a household, there was 4 of us. 2 went to Portland, 2 went to Deering. So we were Turkey Day game was interesting. But it was personal preference. And I think it's really, to me personally, important from when I went to high school, but also for my girls, is that you show on the parent survey personal preference. And I think it's really important that we interview the students, because I think it's the students would also have that as number one.
It is number one.
For both.
Yeah.
And having both of my girls go through and look at all of the schools, my former husband and I bled blue. We went to Portland High. My older daughter looked at Casco, Deering, Portland, said, I'm going to Portland. Second child comes along, and Casco Bay exists. She thought she was going to go to Portland High School. Went to the open house. She came home. She said, Mom, I'm not going there. I said, what do you mean you're not going there? The whole family's gone there. What do you mean you're not going to go? It's not my home. I don't feel that that's my home. She came to Casco Bay and said, this is my home. This is where I feel like I belong. And again, not sliding against any one high school or the other, but she said, if you make me and I don't get into the lottery at Casco Bay High School, I am not going to go to Portland High School. I won't go to school. She was very, not that would have come true, but she was very adamant.
You would have gotten a letter from us.
Yeah, I would have been on the list, but she was very adamant. And I think it comes down to also when they chose their colleges, where they felt at home. And I think there's a sense of belonging. I know there's four current or former board members that have children that went through this process, and I think that the students know when they enter a building, it's not just about their friends, but where they feel safe and where they feel like they belong. And so for me, I'm happy to explore this conversation, and I understand all the challenges, et cetera, but I think it's a larger conversation than this board. I think it's a community conversation because, not just because of alum and not because it's, always been done this way, but well, I'm not going to say force, but it is forced, to say to a child or a student, you have to go to this school because you live at this number Deering Avenue, or you live at this number on Ocean Avenue, or I think we're making students possibly go somewhere they don't want to go. And we get concerned about, dropout rates and engagement and so on and so forth, and I think that that's a large amount of their high school experience. So for me to say that we would go by address, I think we did away with that for a reason, because there is, when I went to Portland High, Deering was a very different school. Portland High School was the most diverse. Everybody got along with everybody. Deering had a certain student population. Those roles have shifted greatly over the years of what Portland High School looks like and what Deering High School looks like. But again, it was a sense of belonging where people felt like they belonged. So I'm happy to explore it, but I don't find that to make a student go to a high school that they potentially don't want to go because they live at X address, I don't think is a proper way for us to have them choose a high school. So I have a lot more to say about that, but I think it's a community conversation. It's not for just this board, because if you haven't had, and I'm not slighting anyone, if you haven't had a child enter into high school or have that opportunity, middle school to high school, and have that experience, you don't know until you experience it yourself and go in with your student, because they are very adamant of what they want. At that point, they're making their decisions. That's where they're going to be happy. So that's my soapbox for now.
Marioni and then Mr.
Actually, go ahead.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Also, like, just adding on to what you said, it's like, for me, my own personal experience, I because I just had come into, like, the country, I, like, wanted to go to Portland High School because, like, that was, like, that high school that, like, was near, like, the shelter and, like, near where I lived. So, like, the moment I heard about Casco and then I got to, like, research about Casco, I wanted to come here, but, like, there was no space in the class, like my class, like my graduating class. So Mr. Pierce had to put me in, like, a different class for me to be at Casco. And, like, I just, like, wonder, like, I wonder, like, people who are who are or who could possibly be in my situation, like, what would be of them, like, what would happen to them. And, like, the ability to have choice is kind of important, because, like, if I didn't have choice in the matter, I think I'd be at a different high school. And, like, the way I love Casco and I feel as if it's a great fit for me, like, if I was at a different high school, my high school experience would be different. And, like, I wouldn't, like, really enjoy, like, going to high school, and I wouldn't say I benefited from going into, like, this Portland public school system. And that's one. The second one was, like, I was wondering, so on this side of the paper, on the parent surveys, I don't see like the option of, like, safety and security, and then on the student side, I see, like, safety and security, and it's, like, it's really placed high. So I'm wondering why is that, and, like, what are, like, measures of safety and security that are done between all three high schools?
I don't remember why that question wasn't included in the parent survey, and I can't tell you what the measures are for safety and security at each of the high schools. I'd be happy to find out, but I don't know that off the top of my head. And that's really not the subject of what we're talking about today, so I'll be happy to research it for you.
Ms. Morioni,
Thank you.
and then we'll go to Ms. Bondo and Ms. Victor.
First of all, thank you for bringing this to us. I very much want to explore this topic. I did not grow up in Portland, and I grew up in North Carolina, for those that may or may not know that. But I didn't have a choice. We had several high schools in my town, and I didn't have a choice, and I feel like I turned out pretty well. What I mean by, what I want to bring up, though, when I'm trying to think about this, I'm trying to think of it not in a personal, because I have two sons. One is currently at Deering, the other graduated from Deering in the spring. I have lots to say about, I think all three of our high schools are remarkable and offer so many amazing things. What I have seen, though, is divisiveness that starts to happen, even within our own neighborhood, even across the street. When you have a family that then, chooses to send or even the students decide to go to a high school that's downtown versus the one that they can see right across the street, it does start to divide a bit the community feel, particularly if these students have gone to elementary school together all through middle school and then high school. So I just want to raise the issue again, the feeling of a little bit of divisiveness that seems to happen at that time when parents and students start to decide on high schools. The other part that I find is around the equity issue, so I'm very happy that you're bringing up this idea of a central high school fair and consistent messaging. And I think as an extremely active parent, we started talking about this in our household in elementary school, when, and then in middle school, we were very active, very much understood the options. And all along, as a parent, you say, okay, well, my child's not going to say. The parent, we're going to help choose. But then you realize as you get closer and closer to that time, the child, your student starts to say, this is really where I want to be, and it may be, for various reasons, including a lot around, in my family, it was around their friends and around sports, and then looking back on it, they're going to have great friends and great sports, I think, in any of our high schools. So what I'm trying to talk about, though, with the equity piece here, I don't feel like that all of our families have equal opportunity to understand this really important part or decision among within their families at times. The other thing I think is we just voted to approve solar panels on all of our schools, and that's our plan to improve the environmental impact of our schools. And here when we talk about school choice, in my opinion, it takes away from one of the main reasons I ran to be on the board, which is around neighborhood schools, walkable schools, community, and strengthening our communities. And yet we would like to say, okay, we're going to have my neighbor who's now her son has to get either on the bus or get driven across town. And I'm just thinking again of the environmental impact of that decision too. So that was another thing going through my head. The other hard thing for me too is this is happening nationally, this whole free market education. It's happening in our current administration right now with vouchers and the ability for students to go wherever they'd like to go. On one hand, I get it, and I think again, the age where they're making decisions and not necessarily having the guidance throughout middle school, and I like very much the idea where you talked about that even starting as early as 7th grade, they would be educated on how to start making very, life decisions versus making them on either guided by a guidance counselor, this is probably where you should go, and or not really knowing and just kind of following possible friends. So I think that's all for now. I very much like that we're talking about this. I do like the idea of bringing in the community to help us with this decision. It's a huge one. I get it. Again, not being from Portland, I understand the impact and the bleeding blue. I going to an NC State university and knowing the impact of those Dukies and then the UNC. I know how incredibly, again, divisive it can get when you're rooting for a team or you're rooting for a school and that is your family, that's where you should go. But I don't think, again, high school necessarily, in my opinion, is where it should start. So I'll close with that, but again, I appreciate all the hard work. Thank you.
Ms. Bondo?
Thank you so much for the presentation. This is something that we've been looking for a couple of months. So I have a little concern about, because I raised my kids mostly in Atlanta, Georgia, so he didn't have any school choice. He's been to district, and they've been doing good. So either those options, all the schools is about education, is about all academic success that we can give to the student. Because when I hear about some of the students been changing their idea on the open house when they go visit the school. So I wonder if the schools are really a plan, enrollment plan, marketing, the way they really advertising their school on the opening day. So something that we really need to think about it also. And one more thing, when I look at on the last page here, the percentage on the student from the middle school are choosing the school, you can see on the range on the Portland House School, the student who choose is mostly the neighborhood on the Deering High Schools, who decide to don't use the community school but go to Portland High School. So that means those are the neighborhood, that's like the outsider domino effect, and I can see that means something happening in that neighborhood will really make them change. So even though we can talk about choosing options or the district man, we need to make sure what's the issues, what's the concern happening on those schools. Because even though we're giving options and we see the large amount of students moving to Portland High School, my concern is going to be about the achievement gap. When is going to happen? Now the increase of the large classes, how many students now we have on each classes in the Portland High School? So when you look at about the largest in the class, the academic level and the student need to have is getting low because there's a lot of students in the class. Plus, the student who's supposed to have a really need, they don't get a lot of support because the teacher or the counseling, the substitute teacher, they don't have enough time to give those kind of support because of the large number of the students. Plus, what happened is really a big division inside of the community because we don't give the quality on the academic that we're supposed to give to the students. So that means those options are good, but we need to make sure what's really happening, what's the issues. And when we find really happening inside the school and those schools, on the leadership, administration, staff, everything's happening, will make us understand why the neighborhood in that school don't choose the community school. That's the time we can start building strategies to try to solve what's happening. Because either way, what's going to happen? We don't make any right choice. The student and parents may decide to move out of the district because the main issues never find any solution. So I think we need to find out, first of all, what really happened, what is happening inside those schools, what's the reason that the community around the school, the neighborhood, they don't choose that school and live in it. And then we find a concern. If they need a coaching, we're just investing on the core instructions. So I think those are the coaching that the school administrator need to have to make sure how to run a school, because that's the leadership issues that we're facing then. And as soon as they know how to run a school, they can have an enrollment plan, a great marketing issues, how they can do the marketing for the school. And I think we can start talking, because that's a large issue that we need to involve in the large community. But the more concern is what's happening, what's the reason, and to find out how we can build our strategies to try to solve that.
Well, just let me address that, because I did not cover this. I think there's several significant pieces out of this. I think that, one, you see that historically there has been fairly consistent distribution. So this year was a sharp
Right.
change. And so I think that that's why I really, I know that people were interested in this, and I wanted to have it there, but I don't know what to conclude other than what was already concluded in the presentation, which is we saw a sharp decrease. So I don't think that there is something systemically that's been happening at Deering that makes people not want to go to Deering. I think that there were a number of events that happened last year that created the conditions where we saw a sharp change, and we know that one of those was not anything that Deering had anything to do with, which was the enrollment and facility study that we worked on as a district, and that again, assuming that the population that responded to the survey was representative of the district, was a quarter of the parent population, that the enrollment and facility study might have accounted for up to 40 of those people who wound up not going to the school. We also have, anecdotal evidence about things that happened during the open house, that happened during the visitations and things along those lines that made it a less than appealing option to people. And I think that is, some of the reasoning behind recommendations to centralize the school choice process so that we can control to some extent for some of those variables that played out last year. But I want to be clear that we should not walk away from here thinking that there's something systemically wrong with Deering, because as you can see from that data, it's been pretty consistent in terms of where kids went every year from the different middle schools, and it changed sharply this year, particularly for Lincoln and for Moore. So I think that's I think the big takeaway from these charts.
Last more thing that I just want. When you mentioned about explanation, you really talk about the focus group, and I think what we miss on that side of the survey, then I see is a focus group, because that's a powerful asset, and we can use to try to find the quality and satisfaction on the education basis. So I think if we can rely on some other focus group for the future, try to work on that so we can try to get the good data and reports on the quality and satisfaction.
And there's a significant resource issue involved in being able to do that work. And I think that's why we had the survey and we've done the survey analysis, but we don't have the resources. We don't have people that that are researchers that can go and do this work. So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Vigdor?
Thank you, and thank you for this information. I agree with much of the comments of Board Member Morion. I personally do not think that the status quo is okay. If you just look at the financial impact alone, the idea that we're going to incur, or we have incurred $250,000 to address the dip in enrollment at Deering this year is untenable given how tight our budget is. And I think our job as the school board is to run the overall system in a way that benefits our students broadly. My kids are younger, so I haven't had the process of going through this the high school selection process in Portland personally, and I did not grow up in Portland. But I do remember my own college selection process, and when I selected my colleges, I was 17. I was a great deal older than when you select your high school. And I remember how confusing that process can be, and how, in some ways, how random it could be and was. And I think what we're offering in Portland is 2 comprehensive high schools and then Casco Bay, which offers a different model. And so we are offering our students much less, we're offering our students kind of 2, what I see as, 2 options, a comprehensive high school or a different model. And I think I'm not convinced that that high school choice is so critical to the success of our students that we need to keep it as the process we use at a time when we're seeing, this swing in enrollment and the financial impact, as well as the impact as you spoke about, Superintendent, on the leadership of the class in coming years at Deering, and the other impacts that will come from the drop in enrollment this year. So I believe that we definitely need guardrails on this process, and I am interested in continuing this conversation in terms of how best to go from here. But I definitely don't think we should continue this process just because it's what we've done over the last few decades.
Ms. Davis and then Mr. Mr. Norris.
The process has changed a lot over the decades, and so what we're doing now isn't what was done in 2005 or 1979. One of the things that we haven't talked at all about is the impact of our Nellie Mae grants and the development of 2 very distinct and different models at our 2 high schools. So while they are both comprehensive high schools, we spent millions to make them different types of comprehensive high schools. And it's unfortunate we didn't ask that question when we surveyed both students and parents, because one of the things that I am wondering about, and I think is a question we need to hold since we heavily invested in that, is what has the impact been of that investment on the perception of the schools, on where people see them? Because ISSN, the International Studies Schools Network, was a very different thing than Johns Hopkins Talent Development. I would also ask if staff could go back and look at the implementation of Nellie Mae, because I think that might be tied to the last time that we had that sort of odd dip. And I'm just curious. I don't remember, but Johns Hopkins Talent Development was nowhere near as popular when first implemented as the ISSN. And there were a lot of students who chose to go to Deering because they perceived and preferred that model over the talent development model, which came out of Baltimore as a very different approach. And now we have students who seem to be preferring that model if the model was indeed even a factor in their choices. So I think that's something we need to look at, because we've had a theory of action over the time I've been on the board that having a model is an important thing and makes a difference, and we invest heavily in that, whether it's IB, the 2 high schools, expeditionary learning. And, part of the question I'm asking is, does it actually make a difference here? Because it was not the board's intent that the 2 high schools be the same at all. The other, so following up on when Nellie Mae was implemented might explain that other dip. The other question that I hold is when I look at where students from different middle schools went, one of the things that I see is something that I saw way back when my kids were making their choices in, 2000. My oldest was making his choice, and so was his soccer team and his basketball team, the guys that played outside of the school teams. There was a lot of discussion because those teams included students from all over the city. And it was the Moore students who were making a choice, generally, and I think it still seems to be pretty much the same, with the exception of perhaps some weakening in the Deering.
Lincoln this year.
Lincoln to Deering. Mm-hmm. But what you also saw a difference in Moore to Portland. And Moore serves two very distinct geographic areas. So one of the things we need to do to really understand this data is to break it down by the geographic origin of those students. Because has there been a shift between the number of students who reside in North Deering versus the number of students who reside on the peninsula and who very well might say, finally, I'm not going to ride a bus to a middle school that's in the other side of town. I'm going to go to the school that's just up the hill from my housing, just down the hill from my housing. So that's another factor, because it's not like King or Lincoln, which tend to serve students who are geographically near King, Portland High, Lincoln, Deering High. Moore has been the wild card. It was the wild card back in 2000, and it says to me somewhat, it's still a wild card. It particularly was a wild card this year, because it made a big jump from 20% to over 60%, I think is what this is saying. And that could be explained simply by the increase of housing on the peninsula. So there's more data that we need to really understand what's going on here and to help us to be able to project and track. The other thing I'd like to posit, because I guess it's maybe because I spent 23 years living on Peaks Island, and when you live on Peaks Island and you take the boat every day, you see Portland as one thing. You see the mainland as one entity. And the development of neighborhoods and the development of this idea that only the people who live a few blocks from you is new to Portland. I lived in Portland before we had neighborhood associations, when we saw ourselves as just Portland. Maybe the biggest division was whether you went to Deering or to Portland, but it was a very friendly, joshing kind of division. It was not mean. That some of the divisiveness that we've seen, I think we've created ourselves, because we've come to believe that if you don't live a few blocks from each other, then there's something wrong with that. I actually think there could be something beautiful, Ms. Morioni, in the fact that students across the street from you are going to a different high school, and the kids are still going to see each other. To me, that was the beauty of when I brought my kids into the mainland, or when they played sports that were not school-based. And they have had friends, they still have friends who did not go to their high school, did not go to their middle school, and certainly didn't go to their elementary school because they went to one of our tiniest schools. So it could also be seen as a way that we actually knit Portland together and create one city. We're not that large. And the divisiveness is hard to watch after having spent so many years seeing the mainland as one thing. It is one thing. We want our students to grow up together. And so I think however we look at this, we want it to be not a zero-sum game where you lose out on stuff, but that we work to knit the community together in a positive fashion, because our goal as a board has always been that we have 3 excellent choices. And students often find, and having worked with students in their college selection, where students can be, oh, this is the only place I can possibly go to school, I fit here, and then to have them transfer 1 year later, or to not get into that school and go to another one and go, you know what? I'm so glad I didn't go to my first choice because it was the wrong choice. I just didn't know it then. So I think it's helping students see that we have 3 excellent choices, and that wherever they end up, they will still have friends who go to the other 2 excellent choices, and we as a community will support them and help them find their best fit, and that they can fit more than one place. I think it's important, how we package this and message it is really important so that it doesn't become a divisive factor in our community. So I think some more data is necessary so that we really can unpack what happened. And then looking at, I think, some standardization, because having also walked on a lot of college tours, boy, it's amazing the impact that your tour guide has, which has nothing to do with the school, frankly, absolutely nothing. But they can turn a decision one way or the other. So standardizing the presentation so that students really understand what's the same, what's the guaranteed promise across all of our high schools, and what really are the distinctive factors, and how that can work for lots of different types of students, and how they can fit in in all three schools differently, I think would be a help both for students and for parents who are going through it, and a good time to get some training if they're going to make college or career decisions, which are much the same. I mean, sort of like how many people are working in the thing they thought they wanted to do when they were in high school? Not me. Most people don't. You change over time, and you grow and you learn. So I think helping students to see that this is one choice, it is not an end point, it is simply a step along the journey, would be helpful. But those are my thoughts on this process, and thank you so much for taking a look at this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Ms. Trevor?
Thank you for this presentation. This was very helpful. And I agree with a lot of what's been said already by Ms. Morioni, Ms. Figdor, and Ms. Davis. And I am interested in pursuing this further and looking into it. I think the one thing that I would add to what's already been said is that I'd like to kind of see, kind of what are the forward-thinking minds in education saying about school choice? And how do we, as a district, look at it through the lens of the Portland Promise? We maybe can't know why we did this in the first place because there's no documentation to support that, but maybe, as a new board, we can decide today whether or not this is still something that's virtuous to our educational system in Portland. And I think that is, the starting place to think about whether or not we want to make this change. So I'm interested, Marnie pointed out equity, and I'm interested in looking at those kind of things. How does this affect our socioeconomic makeup of students, and is it a good thing? Do we still think it's a good thing for our students? And I do think it's prudent to look at it as well, just because of the impact that it's had financially and managerially to us this year. And on the second option in the rethinking slide is not, it doesn't do away with student choice, but it's a retooling of it that allows us kind of buffers. So, it's not sort of necessarily all one way or the other. I think as we delve into it, we can look at those options and see where we land.
So Ms. Thompson Mr. Norris, and then Ms. Thompson had a second question.
I just want to say that I think what Ms. Davis was saying earlier is really just spot on. These are three, they might, especially during in Portland, they might seem both just comprehensive high schools on the outside, but these are very unique schools, and I think over time they were designed to be that way, to support individual learning styles and individual choices that are up to each student to make. And I think to revert back to a geographic districting choice would be a betrayal of the Portland Promise. It would be a betrayal of policy JFB, and it would be a betrayal of what students have come to expect for choice in this district and choice in their education. And personally, I again agree with Ms. Davis that the nature of choice in these high schools, it serves to really bring the city together more than it does to split it apart. I had my best friend through elementary school. My best friend, spent all my time in classes with him, did all my group projects in middle school with him at King. And we went to different high schools. He went to Deering and I went to Portland. And we are still really good friends. And now that I'm at Portland, I have new friends that I've met there that I never would have known before. Never went to middle school with them, and they'd gone to different high school, probably never would have met them, and left Portland. And so I think that choice and that mixing up of the different areas, the different choices, the different people, different students in Portland is so critical for a full education that we really want to offer our students. I think in terms of options, I think the centralization and timing changes, for the reasons that Ms. Davis was saying, these I think are no-brainers. I think when I was going through my high school selection process, it felt like a competition. It felt like these schools were competing to get me, and they were rivaled against each other. And I don't think that is the way that we want to go about promoting these schools to our students. We want to have an equal representation from each school, kind of make sure that all the cards are on the table for these students to make their choice. I don't want to be packed in a gym of one school and then the next school and then the next school, having people get riled up about, oh, this is you got to be part of this family, got to be part of that family. I think it really should be more about the facts of the matter for each school and what they have to offer. And I think centralizing that process, making it more standardized, is a perfect first step in trying to kind of regain control of enrollment at these different schools. And then again, changing the time frame. I think obviously thinking ahead is never a bad thing. Students might not really have a full choice in their minds yet, but still, I think it would, again, help with budget, and I think it would prevent a lot of these confusions along the way. And, again, it would be really helpful for the college process, which I'm currently in the midst of.
Thank you, Ms. Norris. Ms. Thompson?
Exactly.
Well, I was just sitting here thinking about something that Ms. Davis said, and it made me think about how we have set up this district. So this board and previous boards have set us up for IB at Ocean Avenue. That's a choice. Expeditionary learning at Presumpscot, a choice. Spanish immersion at Lyseth, a choice. So we're starting them out in elementary school and having the parents also ask, can my child potentially go to Lyseth? They apply. You know, can they go to the IB school? So parents are already doing this.
I just want to, before that goes too
Yep.
far, that's not factual. So,
Not anymore?
Ocean Avenue is a neighborhood school.
Yep.
Presumpscot is a neighborhood school, and we do occasionally, when there are students from outside of the district that apply to Lyseth, or from outside of the neighborhood that apply to Lyseth, and there is room, then we will take them. That happened this year for the first time in several years, but otherwise, Lyseth is, the immersion program at Lyseth is entirely for the past 3 years, I believe, Lyseth neighborhood students.
Because when we did set all of those up, it wasn't based the way you're saying it. Even when we opened East End Community School,
Yep.
we were busing them all over the city of Portland to go to East End because it was the new flavor, and then that we understood didn't work. But I'm just saying, whether it's a choice or not, we've set up all these different models of learning that, again, so you have to go by your address in order to go to Spanish, or you have to go by your address to go to Expeditionary, and that's what you're saying, is where they live now. And so I don't think it's just a high school thing that we're talking about. It's about the whole district from elementary up, because we have set it up this way. We have set it up for choice, for what works for your family, and you may buy a house now in Lyseth because you want to go to Spanish immersion, or you might buy a house in Presumpscot area because you want to go to Expeditionary learning. So I guess we don't have two comprehensive high schools. We do have very distinctly different. We also don't have 3, we have 4 paths. And that's a choice that a lot of students make as well, of what they want to do. And it was very different when I went to school to what it is today. It's much more encouraged to go to paths, whereas it was discouraged when I was there. It was the kind of like the misfit island. People would say, oh, well, if you don't, and it was unfortunate because they have a lot to offer here. But people went there for trades, and it was like, oh, you weren't going to go to college, so you go to Paths. And it's so different now that Path is a great opportunity. And again, it's an opportunity that we're providing to students, a way of learning. So I appreciate, again, like everybody said, the work, and we can talk about it, but I think it's a larger community conversation before maybe we ease into it about the fair and have them talk the same talk, and because I think they do sell the schools, and where you feel you get the information. I've had people say to me, "Oh, I went to this open house and that was really cool," or "I went to this open house." So, I mean, I think a baby step, in my opinion, would be to start with that fair discussion, but to go from here to where you live by address, where you go to high school, I think is a huge step. And if we're going to do this to ease it in, that's all.
I'll have a couple of questions and some comments. First of all, of the survey respondents, you did mention, Superintendent, that of the 100 parents, you found that most of them, or a majority of them, were from Portland High School.
I don't remember the
accurate?
data. I'm certain that it was the majority, but I don't know, that it was 75-25. I don't really know.
My question was going to be about the 300 student responses. Do we know where they came from?
We do, and I don't remember that either.
Do you recall if they were pretty proportional,
They weren't.
representative?
There was one school, I think more that we didn't get many responses from at all. So I think otherwise it was uniform, so.
Okay. So one thought, if we should decide to go further, to continue with high school choice, I would like to, in the choice process, to maybe include a question of why you're choosing this, so that we're not surveying afterwards, but as it's happening. Maybe similar to what the survey responses were. Another question is, how many students do we keep track of how many students have transferred from one high school to the other?
We do.
How many have transferred from?
I don't know that, but I can find out for you.
It'd be good to know, and also the reasons for those students to transfer.
That we may not have.
But maybe we can have, maybe staff can give us a general idea of the reasons that students come with when they transfer, just for us, for the board and public to have an idea of what causes it, or what drives that, a transfer. It doesn't happen very often, does it?
It does happen significantly, yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember what the numbers are, but they are surprisingly, there's surprisingly large number of students that change along the way.
Interesting. Okay. So that'd be important, or rather interesting for me to find out. The other question was, and I guess Mr. Navanza sort of kind of answered it, of students who are not in Portland Public Schools during their 8th grade, so students that are moving into Portland as they're entering high school, they also get a high school choice. Okay. I'm wondering if the board can have a discussion, and if we can look at maybe not extending choice to students who were not in 8th grade in Portland Public Schools, but rather looking more at that point that they're entering, what does the breakdown look, and maybe, because they wouldn't have the same decision-making information than the students who have been here through middle school. And that's just a thought, and I'm wondering more how the school board feels about that than me advocating for it. Next, I did want to say about the proposal to have a centralized school fair. That's something that I've spoken to the superintendent about over the last few weeks. It's something that, to me, it made a lot of sense, because I didn't feel that the whole competitive drive of what the current the representation of our high schools for the 8th graders was a good approach. And I'm sort of I don't want to say that I'm changing my mind about that, but I'm exploring different perspectives, particularly after receiving some emails from parents who talked about, what is good about competition. I tend to disagree with that, because I don't want kids to choose the best school in Portland, but rather what is a good fit for them and how they view themselves as a student and as a member of our community. So I don't want there to be a competition as much as a really level representation of how each school is different, and then the students can then decide, how they fit into each of the 3 different campuses. As you were talking, Mr. Norris, I had this picture of, you were talking about how, I really want you to join the family. I had this picture of Nick Saban with his NCAA championship ring, so I'm like, when's Johnny gonna come? Roll Tide. Yeah. Which I hate Nick Saban, by the way, so not a good picture you painted.
I mean, yeah. I'll just say, specifically that, it was pretty much exactly that. You have and I'll specifically mention at these fairs, especially for obviously more so for Portland and Deering, you're sitting in the gym on the bleachers, And the athletic director is parading around, like yelling about sports and family and rah, 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 and all that. And I think that's a very important part of high school, but that's not what we want to convey in this choice.
Did Casco Bay push their ultimate frisbee?
Ultimate Frisbee?
Theme as part of their.
Sadly enough, they did not. I did not get the cougar spirit going on when I visited.
Good stuff. So again, I do find that of the low, you mentioned how it would have a low impact and a low amount of workload to make happen. I do think that those are good recommendations. I have one concern about using a geographic map for high school choice, and that is that we are seeing Portland is something. So I grew up in Miami, Florida, and in most major metropolitan areas, you have a lot of economical segregation. So you have the poor neighborhood, you have the black neighborhood. In Miami, you had then like the Cuban neighborhood, Hialeah and whatnot. So as we see our city change and we see the effects of gentrification, and we stay to a geographic destination, I do worry about having segregated schools, not just in our high schools, but I worry about it in all of our schools, elementary and middle schools. So I know that redistricting, I know that locking in geographic expectations for high schools is things that we do need to discuss, but it needs to be part of a really big conversation about what is going on in this city and how our neighborhoods are changing. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then lastly, as I'm sure everybody's going to want to know, what are our next steps? What have you heard today from the board, superintendent, and how are you reflecting on what you've heard?
So I obviously have to reflect more on it, but I do think that in general that there is an interest in continuing this conversation. I think for you and I to sit down and try to figure out, is that a workshop or, another set of, does it go to a committee or things along those lines? I think that those are the next conversations that we need to have. I do, I'll say that, I'm feeling a general sense of support for some of the lower impact, lower degree of change opportunities that we put on the table. So I think for us to actually continue that conversation internally with our staff, because they're the ones that have the on the ground understanding of what the implications would be of the centralization, what the resources needed to be able to do that, what is the impact of adjusting the timing to involve seventh graders and things along those lines. I think that I sense a generally strong sense of support for those ideas, and I will definitely continue that conversation internally with staff. I know we briefed principals on it, and there are concerns about some of those options, just as people are starting to grapple with them. So I do think that we'll be ready when we come back to have a deeper conversation about what the impact of those would be.
Perfect, thank you. And can I, real quick, Ms. Victor, you go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just wondering about the timing of moving forward with these changes, I guess, across the spectrum of options. Just knowing that, I don't, as it stands now, based on the information we have about our budget next year, I don't believe we can sustain another $250,000 hit to our budget. And so I'm just wondering, what the timeline might be so that we could get this in, whatever changes we do move forward with, we can get them into place for next school year.
And so Chair Rodriguez and I meet tomorrow, and so we will, definitely discuss that. I do want to, just for transparency, and I think because I don't think I covered this well, that the $250,000 this year at Portland was primarily to create a second team. That second team is now in place. So if we were to get another 250 plus students at Portland next year, which again would be problematic for other reasons, but from a budgetary perspective, I don't think that the impact would be the same.
But could we save that money if we don't need that second?
We could.
I guess what I was going to ask was in line to that some of these steps that you highlight in the timeline, the process starts in the fall, so I was wondering what. But tomorrow, you and I will figure it out by the end of the day. Yeah.
tomorrow.
So one serious comment I wanted to close with. So Superintendent Botana, this is more for the public. I'm confident that the school board members already know this. Superintendent and I, as my role as chair, we meet every week and we discuss the agenda for the upcoming meetings, and kind of he updates me with all sorts of interesting and sometimes really scary. Just interesting, yes. Everything's interesting. But I wanted to just let the public know that Superintendent Botana has taken this whole issue of the shift in enrollment at Deering High School incredibly seriously. I've seen him respond to it, and he's even spoken to it as being a very critical time and issue in his time in Portland Public Schools. So I just want to commend him for the work that he's done, how seriously he's taken this, the work that he's had his leadership team take on to address some of the concerns at Deering High School and to bring some of the support to the staff there, while maintaining a strong support and alliance with the other schools' administrative teams. So again, I wanted to thank you, Superintendent Botana, and commend you for the work you've done. I know it's still not over, and you and I still have about another 24 hours worth of figuring this out. But again, thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
You can come back to class. Pardon me?
Want to slide that?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Back to class. Back to your seat. I was going to say back to your seat, and then I realized how bad that would sound. So back to class it is.
That was a good way.
Excellent. Good. All right. Thank you so much for everyone's engagement in that, as I expected would have been. We're moving on to old business. Consideration and action to authorize the board chair and superintendent to sign for a state revolving loan on approved projects. Is there a motion? Ms. Davis, second by Ms. Morioni. Will the superintendent please speak on the motion?
Yes. Davis, Morioni. As you know, thanks to the efforts of our Portland legislative delegation, the state of Maine is once again making funding available to school districts under the state's school revolving loan program. This is the first time in 3 years that funds are available to school districts under this program. The fund provides a 0% loan to be paid back over 5 to 10 years and designates 30% to be forgiven in the form of grant. The maximum loan is capped at $1 million per priority per school building within a 5-year period. The School Revolving Renovation Fund offers funding for projects in 4 areas under Category 1, American with Disabilities Act compliance upgrades, structural roof repairs, indoor air quality improvements, and hazardous material abatement. Tonight, we are going to be asking you to approve the recommendation from staff for the revolving loan applications. But we also have a workshop after tonight's board meeting where we're going to be talking about our capital improvement plan for FY21, and you'll see that we have a first read about that on our agenda under new business. The applications are due to the DOE at the end of this week, and they interact heavily with our CIP plan, which we started to discuss at our workshop a couple weeks ago, and with the Operations Committee earlier this month. In all, we're requesting over $2 million in funding from the State Revolving Loan Project for 6 projects. The applications are all for ADA enhancements at 6 different buildings. All 3 of our high schools, Moore, King Middle and, at Moore and King Middle Schools and at Riverton. And with us tonight to answer any questions that you might have is our Facilities Director, Steve Stelfin, our Facilities Coordinator, Doug Sherwood, and our colleagues and friends from LaValle Bressinger who have helped to develop the applications. So I'm going to ask Doug to come up. Are you leading this, Doug, or is Steve, or who's doing?
Doug will start it now.
Got it.
Good evening, everyone. My grandson, Noah, first day of school, his highlight, pizza and chocolate milk. You know, to get different perspectives from different people.
It wasn't Nick Saban's rings?
No.
Or that math is fun.
Or his math lesson.
Recess is important, too, but that came later.
Fair.
We are here again after a few years hiatus on a program that does bring us value. But also importantly, as I look at it, as we'll see in the capital improvement program later, ADA compliance is very important for all of our students, not just those that are less able or less capable. We're looking at 6 projects ranging from a rough $100,000 at one school to over $700,000 at Deering. We found out something tonight on our way in, so to speak, from our friends at La Valley Brensinger, that one of the projects is probably best undertaken in a larger renovation, and we may step back, but we'll talk about that later. You have in the packets, or the revised packets that went out earlier this week, a description on each one of the projects to give you some level of detail of what the challenges are at each and every school. But as you and may have so many of you have looked at the old 2017 facilities assessment, there's a ream and reams of issues related to ADA, but also windows, doors, roofs, and everything else, with the whole plan being somewhere on the order of $320 million just to fix what we have, not what we're dreaming about or looking to do. So we asked you to give due consideration to the little amended work that happened earlier this week, and if there are any questions or concerns, and even more elaboration on the one comment I've already made, Lance, Joe, or Steve and I are here to address.
Doug, so the board has in their packet the six projects. Can you tell them which one you're thinking doesn't go forward?
Yeah, it's a portion of the King Middle School project. We're looking at, for those who may get into the finer details, this is really a finer detail of ADA. If you're in a wheelchair, you're trying to get into a classroom, where do you need access to? The door handle. If there's a wall right next to the door handle, how do you get that handle and pull the door? So that the clearance in ADA is that you'd have at least 12 inches to the right. So we're looking at over 50 entryways, primarily classrooms at King Middle School, that have that configuration. But as you look at the bigger project, if I'm taking part of the wall away, is it really the time that I should also be replacing lockers, doing the floor, taking apart the ceiling, adding some new lighting? So you're hitting so many of those pieces that it makes sense maybe to defer that action. And certain times you don't know necessarily until you've uncovered, what's in that little section, 12 inches to 18 inches wide and 30 inches deep. There might be a passageway for ventilation, electrical conduits. We could certainly look at the drawings, verify, but a lot of times you have to do that in detail and take it apart. So there's a sensitivity that we might think that's actually a bigger project than it is, or it could be.
So you're proposing that we remove that $356,000?
No, just a portion of that particular, this item on the 50 doors and frames comes to roughly $94,000, $95,000, and there would be a change for fees and negotiated, so it's probably about $100,000 off that total.
$100,000 will be the request as opposed to 356?
No, $100,000 less.
Less, so 256.
Yes.
Okay.
Are we on us? Do we have any
Can I
questions?
just add to that all of these projects are culled out of the Sebago Technic's identified needs of the schools. And Doug did a great job describing it. But basically, there are 2 columns. One was for the 0 to 5 years, and then it goes out beyond. You have 2 columns in the report. One is for 0 to 5, which we tried to focus in on that need for this SRRF protocol. So what we looked at was to replace the doors. The next column over was 0 to 6 to outward. There's a planned renovation in the Sebago Technics that was for ADA in outer years that included taking out the corridors and widening things out. So it's a reduction of $100,000 on that project. But the core 0 to 5, changing the doors, still remains. So it was a mistake that we didn't read past 6 and outward for a full renovation of the corridor to move those small sections and get the full ADA compliance of that doorway.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions from the board? None. Great. Any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion on the motion? Ms. Morioni?
I just want to say thank you very much to staff. Thank you very much for doing this, because I know we have missed a few years of doing this, and not to the fault of your own, but just, I know in previous years, it hasn't always come before us to even vote on. So thank you very much for doing this, and I'm in 100% support of working to get the state revolving loan. Hopefully, we'll get it approved. So I'm happily going to support it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mooney. Any other comments? Seeing, I'm sorry, Ms. Victor.
Yeah, I'll just echo those comments. I mean, we have such needs in our facilities, and to be able to use this money, which is frankly such a better deal than the CIP, to address some of our greatest needs, including ADA compliance, is really terrific. So thank you to the staff for moving forward with these projects.
Thank you. So I'll just echo the same sentiments. Thank you for bringing this forward. This is obviously a much better avenue for us to address these needs and these projects. So we're very thankful to have the opportunity to access the revolving fund. So having said that, I think did I ask for public comment?
Yeah.
I did. Okay, so we're back. We'll put it to a vote then. All those in favor of authorizing the board chair and superintendent to sign for a state revolving loan on approved projects, please indicate. And that's unanimous with the students voting in favor as well. Thank you all. Thank you, staff, as well. All right, we're on to new business. We have a couple of three first reads. First read to approve the contract between Portland Public Schools and Harriman Associates. And a reminder, there are no comments on first reads. Then we have a first read on the FY21 proposed capital improvement plan request. And as superintendent reminded us a moment ago, we do have a workshop on that at the end, or rather following tonight's meeting. Also, we have a first read to determine the board position on 2019 and 2020 MSBA Delegate Assembly resolutions. And we have a note here to remind us that each resolution will be taken up separately at the October 15th meeting.
The resolutions are in the packet. And the resolutions are in your packet.
And the resolutions are included in the package. And as I said at the start of tonight's meeting, any member who's interested in attending the conference, to please let us know so we can get everything set up for registration. And next, the consideration and action to. I'm so sorry, Ms. Victor.
Sorry, just noting that the contract with Harriman is not in our board packet.
I noticed that too, so we will make sure that it gets uploaded
Thank
there.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So moving on, consideration and action to ratify the collective bargaining agreement between Portland Board of Education and Portland Education Association. Is there a motion? Ms. Victor, second by Ms. Trevorrow. Will the superintendent please speak to the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask Human Resources Executive Director Barb Stoddard to walk us through the proposed changes to the contract that we're asking you to ratify today. At our last meeting, I shared the goals and accountabilities that we developed collectively against which you will measure my work. And as you know, one of those goals is tied to improving the measure of instructional focus in our schools. This measure, which is tied to the people goal of the Portland Promise, measures the extent to which our staff believe that we have a vision for what we're trying to achieve through our collective work, that they believe that this vision represents what they are trying to achieve, and they believe that it's worthwhile, and that we have the support structures to allow them to achieve that goal. A contract that allows us to continue to attract, support, and retain talented and diverse staff is pivotal to that effort. I know that our staff, every one of our staff, is committed to our Portland Promise goals, and that they believe that those goals are worthwhile. The part of the equation that this contract addresses is the support structures to do that work. This contract shows our staff that we believe in them, and that we show that belief by compensating them in a regionally competitive way and by establishing structures for collaboration and shared decision-making about issues that affect their ability to do that work. I'm thrilled that our partnership partnership with our teachers' collective bargaining agent, received a strong endorsement from the rank and file, and I'm particularly grateful to the board's negotiators, Chair Rodriguez, members Figdor and Davis, as well as members of my team, Malia Nally, Longfellow Principal Terry Young, and of course Barb Stoddard, who you will be hearing from in a moment, for their work in helping to get us to this contract here in front of you today. I also want to recognize the work of Jeannie Crocker, now retired Assistant Superintendent, who was an integral part of that team, and our lead negotiator, Campbell Badger, at Drummond Woodsum, for his commitment and hard work. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Barb.
Great, thank you. So as you've heard and as you've probably read in the board package, the team started work in April. We worked pretty consistently into the summer, and so we are very happy to be getting to the finish line here. As the superintendent mentioned, PEA voted to ratify on September 13th with a quite large majority, so that's excellent news. What I'm going to do is run through the key changes. You've heard all of these before in executive session, but I want to, for the public, to run through them again. So the most important piece are the financials, and for this year, we see a 1% increase on the scale plus steps. And for years 2 and 3 of the contract, we see a 2.5% increase on the scale plus steps. So this is a total of just under 11% over the 3 years of the contract. When we get into language changes, we have a number of key changes in the contract. The first one I'm going to mention is Article 8, which is around health insurance. The change there is extending language for two-person coverage at the adult with child level. So previously, we just had a group of grandfathered folks who were covered at that level, and newer employees who took two-person were only covered at the single level. So we are now rolling those folks in with adult with child. I will mention that anyone electing for this still does need to demonstrate that their spouse or domestic partner does not have access to insurance through their own employer. Then we have 3 items in Article 10, which is the workday and work year article. The first one is transition time. We've added 10 minutes at the end of the teacher workday on Wednesdays to transition to professional development. The second item is a lunch period. We are providing a lunch period free from supervisory duties for all secondary folks at the middle and high school levels. We did have some issues with this during, as we went to implementation, and so we actually have put an MOU in place for this year, and we will be discussing it and coming up with solutions as part of the Living Contract Committee this year. The third item in Article 10 is overnight activities. So teachers will receive compensation of a day off for every overnight that they supervise with students. And these days would be scheduled with the approval of their administrator. In Article 11, we made a change for non-instructional supervision. So we removed language that was restricting of teacher assignments to non-instructional duties. So really this allows administrators to assign teachers to playground duty and lunch duty without having to show economic necessity, which was what was there previously. Then we have 4 items in Article 12. Article 12 is salaries. The first one is we are offering experience credit for EdTech 3 experience. That will be on a 2-to-1 ratio, and it will begin with this hiring year. The second item is around differentials and teacher leadership. This change will affect Schedule D. So if you look at the back of the contract, there are 2 schedules. C is differentials and D is teacher leadership. The changes will really be affecting Schedule D, and it will establish the right of the board and administration to create and oversee educator leadership stipends to carry out and promote school priorities through a new process. This new process we're calling Category B leadership stipends. Going forward, If you look at that schedule, you will see at the bottom, there are these level A, B, and C stipends. We are going to be reworking those stipends now, and the change to that will be this idea that we will be bundling $1,500 bundles based on the work that's being done. So there will be a team this year, again, as part of the Living Contract Committee, that will be looking at those existing teacher leadership stipends and reassessing them and then assigning a dollar value to those. The final change in Article 12 is around summer work. We're increasing the compensation from $29 an hour to $30 an hour, and we're also clarifying that the hourly rate applies to educators who voluntarily offer to work for the summer school program. I'm sorry, there's one more Article 12, and it's around moving classrooms. So often at the end of the school year, teachers are notified that they need to move their classrooms. We are agreeing to pay 6 hours of compensation for moving the classroom if a teacher does not receive at least 48 hours of notice prior to the last teacher day of the school year. Article 21, there's a change to the temporary leave of absence. This is around personal days. We basically tightened up the language there. So personal leave days are going to be limited to important legal, household, and family matters, and really cannot be used for recreational or money-making purposes. Also, during the month of May, teachers need to disclose the reason for personal leave, and they need to provide 7 days' notice for that leave. And finally, in terms of the extended leave of absence, so we often have teachers who are taking an unpaid leave for a year. This change that we made authorizes the Human Resource Director to consider resignation of any educator who fails to give timely notice of their intent to return. So we've set January 31st as the notice date for anyone who's on a leave of absence to let me know that they are actually returning the following year. So those are the key changes. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you, Barbara. Are there any board questions? Do we do public comment on this? Yeah. Is there any public comment on the motion?
Thank you. Do I have to say my name and address?
If you don't mind, yes.
Sorry, lost the. So I'm Carrie Foster. I'm PEA president, working on the negotiations team with everyone, and also a Portland resident of Danforth Street. I'd just like to note kind of the same thing that's already been said, except the educators in the Portland Education Association approved this 3-year contract with 97.5% of the vote. So I know people have said overwhelming majority, and we're really happy to have been able to work with such a team that made that possible. It does reflect the hard work of a negotiations team led by former President Sue Olafson and current Vice President Beth Arsenault. I'd like to thank this team, which also included teachers Kevin Brewster, Brian Dodge, Carrie Dowdy, Lisa Hatch, Allison Hinckley, and Jen Jackson, as well as a committed district and board members, as well as committed district and board members, for creating a contract that provides a fair and stable environment from which our educators can work to fulfill the Portland Promise. The PEA looks forward to continued collaboration along these lines. So thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Is there any board discussion on the motion? None? Seeing none, I'll just, Ms. Victor, did you have something?
Thank you. I'll just say that I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the process and to be on the negotiating team, and hearing Ms. Stoddard walk through after several 6 or 8 weeks since we've finished our negotiations, to walk through kind of where we ended up. It's pretty remarkable, and I want to thank Carrie and the PEA for such a collaborative process. I do think that my understanding is that we agreed on a contract in record time, and I think that the outcome is best for our students, and certainly supporting our teachers and working towards the people goal. So I appreciate the chair for and the board for allowing me to participate in the process, and I'm really pleased with the outcome.
Thank you, Ms. Figdor. If we don't have any other comments, I'll say that I certainly hope that it showed that the board, through the negotiations and what the contract ultimately represents, that it shows that the board values and supports our teachers in our district, and that we're happy to have found so much common ground with the teachers through the process. I wanted to thank Board Member Davis and Ms. Figdor for being part of the negotiations team and so quickly and meaningfully engaged with the work. It really was a great experience to have the level of experience that Ms. Davis brought in and the historical knowledge that she brings to negotiations. It came through over and over about how important it was to have that perspective. And then Ms. Figdor being incredibly engaged and asking so many questions. I think it really allowed us to understand what we were negotiating, the purpose for it. I think staff did an incredible job at explaining to us what the rationale for their proposals was, and overall, it just felt like a good process. And again, hopefully the high percentage of approved votes from the PEA is indicative of their approval of what I'm mentioning was a good process. So having said all that, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of ratifying the collective bargaining agreement between Portland Board of Public Education and Portland Education Association, please indicate. And it's unanimous with these students voting in favor as well. Thank you all, and thank you, Carrie, for coming tonight and speaking to the board. Appreciate it.
Personnel? Yep.
All right, next. You're tired, bro. No, it's okay.
I'm looking at the clock.
I know you are. Next personnel items, consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed. 1 year only teachers. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Ms. Davis. Will the superintendent please speak on the motion?
I'm going to ask Ms. Stoddard to do that.
So tonight, we're bringing forward 3 teachers. We are slowly getting to the end of our hiring, but we're not quite there yet. And you have in front of you 3 teachers, 3 probationary teachers for your approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, there are no public comments on personnel items. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the personnel items listed, 1 year only teachers, please indicate. And that's unanimous as well, with the students voting in favor. Thank you. Next, just barely. Given that it's before the hour of 10 p.m., it's 9:58, is there any public comment on items not on this evening's agenda? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment, and I'll take a motion to adjourn the business meeting. Ms. Davis, second by Ms. Trevorrow. All those in favor? It's unanimous with the students voting in favor. We've adjourned at 9:58 p.m.